brother! Y'all, for the better part of the last 3 months of the year, we have been working on the question, what if Ron Weasley had been sorted into House Hufflepuff? It has been a massive endeavor. It has taken us 10 different parts, way longer than we ever anticipated. So what we have for you today is a big, mega episode with all of the intros, all of the ads cut out for your viewing pleasure. So without any further ado, what if Ron wasn't Hufflepuff? What if Ron wasn't Hufflepuff? Hey, brother! One of the most common and pretty fun Harry Potter theories out there is that the Golden Trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, sorted into Gryffindor, actually each represent the other 3 houses. Harry is Slytherin, the house he was so nearly sorted into. Hermione, the cleverest witch of her age, represents Ravenclaw, and Ron, the ever-loyal best friend, represents Hufflepuff. Now, we've explored the question, what if Harry wasn't Slytherin, and ever since then, one of the most requested what-ifs we've had is, what if Ron wasn't Hufflepuff? The tricky part about answering this is that, as Ron is so keenly aware, he is not the main character. So if he's not around Harry, it's hard to say how it affects Ron. Is it then a story about Ron being in Hufflepuff, or just Harry not having Ron around? Plus, the other big issue is that there is no obvious moment where Ron was about to be in Hufflepuff. Like, for Harry, the Sorting Hat puts him in Gryffindor because he asks it to not put him in Slytherin. So when we approached Harry and Slytherin, what if, what we had to ask was, what would cause Harry not to ask the hat to sort him otherwise? And believe it or not, the answer was whether he ran into Malfoy in Madame Malkin's shop in Diagon Alley, who first began to spoil Slytherin's reputation. At the end of the day, this was relatively easy to modify because it's not a massive reach to suggest that Harry and Draco simply arrive at the shop at different times. Harry doesn't have a bad taste in his mouth and doesn't get further confirmation from Hagrid when he asks him about the other school houses. And from there, it's just off to the races because so much of Harry's story doesn't have to do with which house he's in necessarily, because a lot of Harry's plot is always going to be forced upon him by Voldemort. Like, before Harry ever even steps into school, he already is and will continue to be very important to the wizarding world at large. Ron's a little bit different though, because so much of his plot revolves around what is happening to Harry, so it's a little harder to imagine what each school year looks like if he's just off being best pals with Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Us old pufflags! I need an Ernie Macmillan in my life. The other big detail in these what-ifs, though, has to do with how the characters' motivations change based on where they are. For example, if Harry doesn't run into Draco, he has no preconceived notions about Slytherin and doesn't ask the hat to sort him elsewhere. And without that request, he just is sorted into Slytherin. This time, though, with Ron, we needed to figure out the opposite. What would prompt him to ask not to be in Gryffindor, especially when he comes from such a long line of Gryffindors and, as the story normally goes, wants to be there. And forever, this has posed a challenge for us to write this series until now, when we were recently asked a question by a viewer on our podcast through the Gryffindor that cracked the story wide open. So today we explore, what if Ron wasn't Hufflepuff? Okay, so here is the query that changes everything. What if the Weasleys took Harry as a baby? There are loads of reasons why Dumbledore would push for Harry to be raised by the Dursleys, as he always is. Specifically, his ability to invoke the ancient magic known as the Bond of Blood charm. What that charm means is that while Harry is a resident of Lily's last living relative, he is completely and utterly untouchable by Voldemort. The unfortunate part is that it means Harry is long subjected to life with the Dursleys, who treat him terribly, something that Dumbledore himself laments. "You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands." So the question we need to kick off with today is whether or not this could have been foreseen before Harry was ever left with the Dursleys, and I believe the answer is unequivocally yes. We know from the very beginning of the saga that one Professor McGonagall spends the day in the wake of Voldemort's downfall, sitting by and watching over the Dursleys. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. When Dumbledore later arrives at Privet Drive to oversee Harry's delivery and presumably cast the Bond of Blood charm, he almost seems surprised to see McGonagall.
I should have known that you would be here, Professor McGonagall.
And this is where our mild modification to the story will occur. We are going to argue that Dumbledore sent McGonagall, who is always otherwise his second in command at Hogwarts, to observe the Dursleys to see if they were a proper fit for young Harry. And if actually given this assignment, we know exactly what McGonagall would say. Upon hearing this information, Dumbledore would change course, and instead of leaving Harry with the Dursleys, look for another wizarding family who may be willing to take Harry into their home. Something, again, we know that many wizarding families did offer to do. Dumbledore tells Harry as much. Why could some wizarding family not have taken you in? Many would have done so more than gladly, would have been honored and delighted to raise you as a son. So naturally, it's easy to take a look at the wizarding landscape to see if the Weasleys would be a fit for this potential offer, keeping in mind that at this point they would have 7 kids of their own, including a newborn Ginny. Would they be the family? And I'm inclined to say yes, and beyond a shadow of a doubt. For one, the Order of the Phoenix has been hard at work battling Voldemort all this time, and while Arthur and Molly were not members of the original Order, we know that Molly's 2 brothers, Fabian and Gideon, were. And I've always personally assumed that the key reason why Arthur and Molly didn't join up is because they were too preoccupied with raising their young and large family. But on that exact note, raising a family is something that they do exceptionally well, and even as it stands, Molly comes to see Harry as a son, providing him a place to stay whenever needed, sending gifts for every holiday, and even going so far as to say, "He's not your son," said Sirius quietly. "He's as good as," said Miss Weasley. I've probably over-explained it at this point because we all know how incredible Molly and Arthur are, but you get the idea. The Weasleys would volunteer and Harry would go to live at the Burrow. So, how does this change things? Well, it's hard to ignore the really obvious ripple effects. For one, Harry and Ginny would grow up as siblings, so their future relationship status is pretty modified towards continuing to be siblings. Harry would also be far more informed on the wizarding world, and while his exchange with Draco at Madame Malkin's is what normally turns him away from Slytherin, I think growing up in a house full of Gryffindors would likely turn his head towards Gryffindor specifically. I have no struggle at all believing that he'd want to be in the house of his parents and adopted parents. Also, for what it's worth, I still think Harry ends up getting Hedwig from Hagrid upon turning 11, who would still have been the one to recover Harry from the wreckage after the attack by Voldemort, and would still have a reason to dote on Harry, just a little bit.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I know.
I shouldn't have said that.
No, I knew Hagrid. But how does the addition of Harry to the Weasley family from a young age affect their other youngest son, Ron? At first glance, it seems like great news for Harry and Ron. They get to meet 10 years sooner and kick off their epic friendship right out of the gate. We all know that while Harry and Ron's friendship is near immediate on the train, Ron can't help but deal with his own insecurities as time moves on. He knows Harry can't help being the chosen one and getting all the attention and being famous, but the fact is, he is. And Ron, even from a young age, wants to stand out amongst his impressive brothers. 5, said Ron. For some reason, he was looking gloomy. I'm the 6th in our family to go to Hogwarts. You could say I've got a lot to live up to. Bill and Charlie have already left. Bill was head boy, and Charlie was captain of Quidditch. Now Percy's a prefect. Fred and George mess around a lot, but they still get really good marks, and everybody thinks they're really funny. Everyone expects me to do as well as the others, but if I do, it's no big deal, because they did it first. That's what Ron is usually up against with his brothers, but now Harry is also in that mix, and as impressive as Bill and Charlie and Percy and Fred and George are, Harry probably still has all of them beat before he even gets to school.
Wicked.
Like, just for a small example, imagine Harry getting an owl from Hagrid for his birthday and Ron then inheriting Scabbers instead. Great.
Pathetic, isn't he?
This insecurity gets the best of him even just as friends. For example, in Goblet, when Harry's name is selected for the Triwizard Tournament, or how Voldemort uses Ron's own worst fears against him to try to deter him from destroying the locket. Now you've got Ron, who has always already struggled with where he stands as a Weasley and Harry's best friend. Now he has both of those challenges morphed into one.
Yeah, that's me. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
So they arrive at Hogwarts for their first year, make their way into the Great Hall, the sorting ceremony begins, and first years are called alphabetically to be placed in their houses. Potter, of course, comes before Weasley, and Ron watches as Harry is sorted into Gryffindor and greeted with cheers by the rest of his family.
Better be Gryffindor!
And to be fair, also Harry's family, but you get the point. Now, I don't think that Ron hates Harry or anything, but there is a big difference in being the chosen best friend of the chosen one and being the brother he will always and inevitably be compared to. So in that moment, realization hits Ron and he knows what he has to do. Not Gryffindor. Not Gryffindor. Not Gryffindor, eh? Well, that's more than enough. Better be Hufflepuff! And just like that, Ron defies all expectations from the House of Weasley and takes a seat with the Hufflepuffs. Okay, so where to go from here? Because as we mentioned, it's a little tricky to navigate Ron's daily course load as a Hufflepuff because we simply don't have enough information. However, his feelings of being overshadowed by Harry aren't liable to go away. Given this choice though, it's unlikely he goes out of his way to hang out with Harry and likely just does befriend Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Or as I like to call him, JFF, because Justin Finch-Fletchley takes forever to say. You know what? Maybe just Jeff.
That Lockhart's something, isn't he? Awfully brave chap.
My name is Jeff.
Yes, Jeff. But how is Harry's year different without Ron? Well, the weird thing is that Harry grew up with the Weasleys. He is kind of already filled in on a lot of the things Ron usually fills him in on. Like, usually Ron is Harry and Hermione's source of info about wizard culture, but now Harry just knows that stuff. And speaking of Hermione, are she and Harry still besties? Because usually it's Ron's harsh words that send Hermione into the bathroom on the night of the troll attack, but this time he won't be around to be bothered by her, so they wouldn't end up tackling the troll together like usual. That said, I do suspect that Harry and Hermione end up friends anyway, and rather than Ron, it's Neville who slots in as Harry's other best friend, and I suspect the Remember All situation is the catalyst.
The only problem is, I can't remember what I've forgotten.
Harry defends Neville like usual, thus bringing the two of them closer, and without Ron to serve as a buffer to Hermione, she too is impressed by Harry's chivalry in the situation, even if she doesn't love the fact that he broke the rules to do so, but hey, that's just first year Hermione, right?
I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed, or worse, expelled.
But if the Remember All situation happens, then Harry would still make the Quidditch team as a first year, gaining him huge notoriety, and he'd be joining Fred and George in the process. You can only imagine how Ron feels about that. Not only does Harry get to be on the team as a first year, but he gets a brand new Nimbus 2000. Meanwhile, Ron's just riding around on a Swiffer. Come on, Scabbers, let's go Swift! Even if there was a T in there, a Swifter, it would be better. You know, it's got some speed. Normally though, Ron is just so impressed with Harry for making the team in the Nimbus 2000 because of how much they can shove it in Malfoy's face, but this time it's just something else that Ron didn't get. And if you can believe it, Harry is probably even better at Quidditch than normal this time around, having grown up with Charlie Weasley to look up to. Like, not only is he more practiced on a broom, but he knows about Quidditch ahead of time and specifically has a great seeker to look up to. That probably stings if you're Ron too, like, ah, great. That could have been me, if only Harry wasn't around. But cool, now you have something else to bond with our coolest brother over. Nice. As long as he doesn't help you smuggle a dragon later, I'm good. I'm good. But back to Quidditch. Slytherin gets destroyed by Harry and the Nimbus, as does Hufflepuff, which of course Ron doesn't love, but that's getting just a little bit ahead of ourselves, because before that, Draco still challenges Harry to the midnight duel and still tries to frame him for being out of bed, but Ron, of course, does not join in on the adventure because he's just in Hufflepuff. So instead, Harry, Neville, and Hermione find Fluffy, which also helps to cement their friendship. Aw, man. I didn't get to see the three-headed dog either? Which is important because they won't have the whole troll attack to bond over because usually it's Ron who sends Hermione into the bathroom in need of rescue, but he's not there. So the troll just attacks and Harry ends up back in the dormitory. Which doesn't really change much. Snape still heads off Quirrell and the teachers just deal with the troll. Harry still ends up seeing Snape is injured after trying to get his Quidditch book back from him later, so he's still suspecting Snape. Christmas is a little odd because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley go to visit Harry's best friend Charlie, so despite having a place to go, Harry still spends the holidays at Hogwarts with Fred, George, Percy, and Ron, who is admittedly a lot lonelier not being in the Gryffindor common room, something Harry is quick to notice.
Happy Christmas, Ron. What are you wearing?
Good people, Harry. Now, all the Weasleys pretty much hang out during this holiday anyway, and I think that stays true, but Harry and Ron specifically hang out a little more in the absence of the rest of the school. Ron thoroughly enjoys beating Harry at chess a few times and is able to realize that any jealousy he feels isn't really Harry's fault.
That's wizard's chess.
On that note, I also think that Harry realizes that Ron is feeling a little overshadowed by him, which is why, after his first night out in the invisibility cloak, he also sneaks down to the Hufflepuff common room and wakes Ron up to show him the mirror and his parents. And geez, you can just imagine how this scene would be very different if they grew up in the same household. Ron sees Harry as having everything he's ever wanted, but what Harry sees is a different set of parents he never knew. And Harry is able to see pretty plainly that Ron feels overshadowed by not just him, but the entire family.
Hello, good.
It's a nice moment, and the two seem to understand each other a bit more. But then after break, Harry absolutely thrashes Hufflepuff in a school record fashion, and a bit of Ron's insecurities return. 11-year-olds, am I right? Taking everything all personally.
Yeah, that's me. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
After this is when Hagrid gets Norbert, and there's an odd change that happens. Normally, Ron is the one who writes to Charlie, Harry's best friend, to ask him about getting Norbert out of the school, but now Harry can just write to him himself because he's his best friend, and not involve Ron at all. Dearest Charlie, first of all, you wouldn't believe how I thrashed Hufflepuff. That move you taught me, simply amazing. BT dubs. Hagrid has a dragon. It's also Ron who Draco usually steals a book from to get the information about the night that they're going to get Norbert out of the school. So with no Ron now, that doesn't happen either. So without Draco tipping off McGonagall, do Hermione and Harry just successfully get Norbert out of the castle without getting detention? And alas, earwax, no. Charlie returns Harry's letter, but addresses it to his youngest brother, and thus the owl mistakenly delivers it to Ron, his youngest biological brother. And Ron, who is still upset about the Quidditch match and annoyed Charlie and Harry are making secret plans without him, gives Harry the letter, but then himself tips off McGonagall or Filch or whoever.
Oh dear, we are in trouble.
Which importantly means that Harry, Hermione, and Neville all still get detention with Hagrid in the woods, where, as ever, Harry runs into Voldemort for the first time. And that's a fairly important encounter because it's when Harry realizes that Snape is stealing the stone for Voldemort, not himself, and provides Harry with proper motivation to try and stop him.
Snape doesn't want the stone for himself. He wants the stone for Voldemort.
Which brings us to the obstacle course, and let me know what you think of this. Rather than Harry, Hermione, and Ron, it's Harry, Hermione, and Neville. But what about the chess set, you ask? Without Ron, how will they overcome it? Well, if you subscribe to Dumbledore's big plan, then the chess set is there because Dumbledore knows Harry will bring his friends, and each of them will have to contribute, and that's what Ron is good at. But if Dumbledore knows Ron isn't coming, it won't be there. Or even better, the chess set is there, and Harry now has to solve it himself, which he is only capable of doing because he has been playing chess against Ron for his whole life, not instead of just like since Christmas. And personally, I love that version because can Harry beat Ron at chess? No, but was knowing Ron vital to his success? Yes. Also, I think that Neville, rather than Hermione, solves the Devil's Snare because, you know, herbology. And so they advance. Harry finds the mirror, defeats Quirrell, saves the day, and Gryffindor wins the House Cup! And one of the big things I want to try to point out here is that I know Ron seems like a bit more petty in this version of the story, but it's, again, not that he hates Harry or anything. He just wants to be noticed for who he is, and he is obviously still really happy about Harry's second defeat of Voldemort and that he didn't die. And Harry is sure to thank him afterwards, telling him that he never could have done it without losing to Ron for all of those years.
That's wizard's chess.
And that about brings us to the end of year one and the end of today's video, where the first year of school for Harry and Ron went about as badly as it could have, and then some from Ron's perspective. Harry had continued to be very important, very special, and succeed in a multitude of ways, and Ron continued to feel a little bit more in the shadows. But it's also very important to remember that Harry himself realizes and recognizes the importance of having Ron in his life. But be sure to tune in next week for part 2, where we will continue to dive down the rabbit hole. Or Weasley hole? Weasley hole. Does that sound bad? Doesn't sound great. I think we can all agree on that. So, as usual, let's start with the Dursleys. Harry and Dobby aren't there to mess up dinner, so Vernon probably just makes his deal with Mr. Mason and they get their vacation home in Majorca. That's kind of a bummer, actually. Anyway, back at the Burrow, Harry is having a way better summer with his family where he is not pretending he doesn't exist, and similar to Christmas last year, he and Ron have a great summer together.
I'll be in my bedroom, making noise and...
Harry has access to his Nimbus 2000 all summer and is happy to let Ron, Fred, George, and even Ginny have a go at it while they play Quidditch. Harry even gets mail from Hermione and Neville. This is the part where Dobby usually halts all mail, but clearly making him feel forgotten won't work if he just has a loving family and access to his siblings. So it turns out living with the Weasleys is way better than the Dursleys. Who knew? Let's pause right there. All of us knew. But that doesn't mean Dobby isn't still up to his tricks, and of course still shows up one fateful night to give Harry his big and super vague warning about dangerous things happening at Hogwarts. But Hogwarts is my home! Except for here, where I love it! Harry get like a Scooch Irish there? That said, Dobby's visit does go a bit differently because living at the Burrow, rooms are tight, and he and Ron share a room. Thus, Ron is present for this conversation with Dobby as well.
What the bloody hell was that all about?
And also probably the ghoul. But who's he gonna tell? The pipes! Wait, that's almost relevant for this one. That sentence doesn't actually cause that huge of a difference to the story because Harry typically just tells Ron, Fred, and George all of these details right away anyway, and they just get to theorizing. Ron does, of course, though, have like a little bit of an eye roll here, like, oh my gosh, something else is happening to you, and just immediately assumes it's just some kind of a prank to get him to not go to school. Harry agrees it's possible, but doesn't write it off completely. Then, on the family trip to Diagon Alley, Harry is usually thrown off by the sudden request to master Floo powder and ends up in Nocturne Alley, but having grown up in the wizarding world, he's much more accustomed to it, so that's not really a problem at all.
What did he say, dear?
Diagon Alley.
I thought he did.
This means he doesn't accidentally end up overhearing Draco and Lucius's visit to Borgin and Burke's, which is fine for the plot, but Harry won't get introduced to the Hand of Glory, the opal necklace, and overhear Lucius mentioning all of his cool dark objects. Like how I pantomimed necklace, as if you guys weren't gonna know what that was. Necklace. No biggie though, because instead this trip's dark overtones come from Ron, who despite a good summer with Harry is feeling the looming shadow of school, and this trip will do nothing but remind him that despite being brothers, Harry has a different life than him. First is the trip to Gringotts, where Harry still has access to the gold from his parents, something that he's completely happy to share, but which Mrs. Weasley will have none of, but which Ron is soups jealous of. You mean he's super rich and the school got him the best broom on the market for free? Y'all, I'm not gonna lie, Ron might have a small point. And then there's, of course, Flourish and Blotts, where Harry gets ambushed by Lockhart, and Harry is of course as embarrassed and bothered by the encounter, but rather than feeling annoyed for Harry, Ron is just annoyed at Harry. That being said though, Lucius does still arrive and slips Ginny the diary, thus setting into motion the rest of the plot. And you know what? This time around, I think Arthur does punch Lucius. Because why not? It's okay, I know Arthur, he's a good guy and all. We haven't thrown that many punches in all of SuperCarlinBrothers. We'll give Arthur this one.
We have a very different idea about what disgraces the name of wizard, Malfoy.
Once we arrive at King's Cross though, Dobby is of course still up to his old tricks, and since it's Ginny's first year, Mrs. Weasley goes through with her in an order that totally makes sense, and leaves Ron and Harry left to go last, and wham! Barrier. Now, you'd think Harry in this situation would have a little more sense to just wait for their parents to try and sort this out, but Ron suddenly recognizes an opportunity for a grand entrance and suggests, like usual, the car. Now, of course, they wouldn't have had the experience of getting Harry from the Dursleys like usual because, well, you know, he doesn't live there, but these boys for sure know about the car and what it can do. And thus, Harry and Ron enter the school year on an adventure together, flying high above London and being spotted by some muggles below, and it's an especially good experience for the two of them. They discover that it's hard to get solo time at home because of just how large the family is, and at school they're in separate houses. But now, Ron is really off on an adventure with Harry, really for the first time ever since the Mirror of Erised last Christmas. If you guys don't remember, that was a total gut punch of a scene. But being alone again reminds them of that adventure. Not that they talk about it, just each is able to reflect on how each other has their own struggles. And then from there, they crash into a tree. What are we going to do? Oh no! My wand! Out of breath. Whomping willows, am I right? Not exactly the grand entrance that Ron had in mind, and as ever, Snape collects them before turning them over to their heads of houses. Now, normally this is just McGonagall because they're both in Gryffindor, but of course this time Sprout will have to be there as well, and Ron gets expelled! No, I'm just kidding, but can you imagine Sprout just has this like horrible rigid side to her? That would be so out of character. However, no, she is fairly upset that the Whomping Willow is all beat up, as it is a rather rare and unique plant. And this extra layer of disappointment, coupled with the otherwise very positive day he's had with Harry, leads Ron to admitting that it was his idea to take the car in the first place, and they both get detentions. It's a seemingly similar situation to usual. Harry thanks Ron for taking the Badger's share of the blame, and again, the two seem closer for having shared the experience until the following morning. Letter from Dumbledore last night. I thought your father would die of shame. We didn't bring you up to behave like this. You could have gotten your brother killed. Absolutely disgusted. Your father's facing an inquiry at work. It's entirely your fault. Yeah, the Howler. Even in the main story, Ron is extremely embarrassed by this letter, but this time it is of course much, much worse, because usually Molly's anger is targeted at Ron because she has no grounds to be upset with Harry as she is not his mom. This time, the letter from Dumbledore explains what Ron himself told them the night before about it being his idea, so that's directing her anger, but that she is only mad at Ron and not Harry only serves to fuel Ron's feeling of favoritism. And this really seems to be the theme of Ron and Hufflepuff. Like, whenever they inch closer, the other shoe always seems to drop. Things only continue to reinforce these feelings in Ron as well, as all of the students are currently enamored with Lockhart and his heroics, and Lockhart is still playing favorites with, you guessed it, Harry. And speaking of playing favorites, let's get into day one of herbology. Should be a safe place, right? Where a Frosty with Ron Professor Sprout is kicking things off with mandrakes. Fittingly, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff actually have this class together, and Harry, Ron, Jeff, and Neville grab a table together. As a reminder, Jeff is Justin Finch-Fletchley. And you might be just like a little bit unsure where Neville might land in this particular situation, because there's of course this scene versus the knowledge that Neville goes on to be a bit of a herbology superstar. My personal inclination this go-round is that in part thanks to a bit of extra confidence from having Harry as such a close friend, and Neville's role in bypassing the Devil's Snare in the obstacle course last year means that Neville and by proxy Harry are blooming brilliant at herbology. And as you can imagine, Ron doesn't exactly love the critical acclaim from Sprout at Harry and Neville. Jeff, though, being a good friend to Ron and recognizing the situation, offers Harry some critiques on how he might better handle the mandrake, which Ron does actually appreciate. From there, further injustice seems to ensue when Harry and Ron's detentions for crashing into the Whomping Willow are assigned. Ron will be scrubbing trophies while Harry is going to be responding to fan mail with Lockhart. At least Ron wasn't polishing Harry's trophies, am I right? You know what? It's our story. He was, and all the other ones too. Harry, as always, hears the basilisk for the first time during detention, but can't source it, and Ron memorizes Tom Riddle's name without realizing the importance of it. Then we've got a few sequences that otherwise remain the same as always. Harry is practicing super hard to rally against the Slytherins' Nimbus 2001s and tracks Mud into the castle. Filch gets mad and takes him to his office. We've, of course, got the quick spell letter. Nick has Peeves destroy the Vanishing Cabinet. Harry owes him 1 and agrees to attend the Death Day party instead of the Halloween feast. Neville and Hermione, of course, join Harry for the Death Day party occasion out of #solidarity. Mrs. Norris is attacked, and Filch accuses Harry, publicly, in front of everyone, including Ron, of opening the Chamber of Secrets.
You've murdered my cat.
This begins to shift the tide away from Harry for what feels like the first time ever, as theories that he is Slytherin's heir begin to circulate the castle. It's also a shift for Ron, attention-wise, who has been shamed by the Whomping Willow incident in the Hufflepuff common room, but is now the obvious Harry Potter expert everyone wants answers from. I don't think that Ron really thinks that Harry is behind any of this, but he is enjoying all the extra attention. However, fast approaching is also the Gryffindor versus Slytherin match, where basically the whole school's frustration with Malfoy's buying his way onto the team is surging for a Gryffindor victory. Dobby's bludger makes things interesting, but as per always, Harry snatches the snitch and has his arm broken and then deboned, thanks to Lockhart.
Yes, well, that can sometimes happen.
Then old Dobbert appears to Harry in the night to confess his tampering, and instead of being anxious to report the information to Neville and Hermione, the person Harry actually wants to talk to the most is Ron, who had previously been there for the first encounter with the elf. Oh, you know what? The other honorable mention detail that happens on this night is that Colin Creevey is trying to canonically bring Harry grapes in the middle of the night and gets attacked by the basilisk. That still happens. Anyway, Harry wants to talk to Ron about what happened, but before he has a chance, the dueling club is announced, and Harry, of course, wants to go and learn everything that he can. And we all know how the dueling club plays out. Snape suggests Harry versus Malfoy. Malfoy summons the snake. The snake aims to attack Jeff when Harry calls it off of him. And it looks bad. Heck, it usually looks bad even when Ron is squarely in Harry's corner. A boa constrictor told you it had never seen Brazil? Ron repeated faintly. So, said Harry, I bet loads of people here can do it. Oh no, they can't, said Ron. It's not a very common gift. Harry, this is bad. Obviously, this go round, the boa constrictor hasn't happened, so Harry is just acting on instinct and learning alongside everyone else that he can speak to snakes. And to make things worse, Ron is really close friends with Jeff, being in the same house, plus it furthers the theories that Harry is opening the Chamber of Secrets. Ron confronts Harry about the entire situation the next day, accusing him, like everyone else, of trying to attack Jeff, and wondering why Harry, his own brother, never told him that he could speak to snakes.
You're a parcel mouth. Why didn't you tell us?
Something that Ron, the supposed Potter expert, had failed to mention during all that attention he was getting. Ron, seriously, you forgot that part. I didn't forget, I just didn't know. You can't forget things you never knew. Harry, of course, explains that he was trying to save Jeff, and he didn't realize that he could talk to snakes until afterwards. He thought he was speaking English.
I spoke a different language.
Ron is pretty skeptical of all of this, but then Harry goes on to tell him about Dobby showing up in the middle of the night again and how he was the one who stopped them from getting on the train and set up the bludger. Ron is understandably pretty alarmed to hear this, but it does offer a bit of a release valve as Ron now has someone to firmly blame for the entire car situation. Dobby! Ron leaves the conversation agreeing to tell Jeff that Harry is sorry for scaring him and he really was just trying to help. Unfortunately, once again, this progress made between Ron and Harry will only be brief because it's not long before another attack happens, and as always, it's Jeff.
Who's that girl? Who's that girl?
It's Jeff! Y'all, we can't make this stuff up. Well, okay, I mean, I guess a little bit we can, but like, do you see what keeps happening? Harry and Ron keep getting so close, and then it gets taken away from us again.
You're being stupid.
Yeah, that's me. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
Is anyone else just missing Ron and Harry being BFFs? Or is all I like to call it Befs? Anyway, Ron's mad at Harry again. Just in time for Christmas, too. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are, as usual, all staying at Hogwarts, and Harry, Neville, and Hermione have still been busy brewing the apologies potion to try and question Malfoy. Ron is notably down during the holidays, what with one of his best friends up in the hospital wing, and decides he's going to go and visit Jeff after dinner, when instead he spots Harry hiding behind a staircase. Attacking more students, said Ron in a somewhat joking manner, not believing it, but knowing it will still sting Harry just a little bit. Harry looks alarmed at having been spotted and sheepishly answers that, yes, he actually kind of is, but seeing there is no way of avoiding an explanation, tells him that he's going to try and get some of Crabbe and Goyle's hair to go question Malfoy. A totally normal thing that anybody can be doing at any point in time, but especially on Christmas. Ron, who is just about to go visit Jeff anyway, now seizes the opportunity to get to the bottom of the attacks and insists that he is coming too. Harry, without much of a choice, allows it. Also, Neville, in case you are wondering, is just at home for the holidays. And so things play out like you may expect. Hermione agrees to let Ron come, but then gets turned into a cat lady, and Harry and Ron must go at it alone. Of course, Malfoy doesn't tell them anything new, but does joke happily at the thought of Hermione dying and calls her a mudblood.
As for me, I hope it's Granger.
Ron, who has far less contact with Malfoy than usual and isn't even that close to Hermione, is still a proper blood traitor, which as a reminder is a good thing, is appalled at this guy's awfulness. And so, before Harry/Coyle could stop it, Ron/Crabbe had reared back Crabbe's much larger ham fist and punches Malfoy right in his dumb face. We don't really throw punches here at SCB, so you know what? We're gonna let Ron have this one. Plus, as you can see here, we paid the punch budget. Totally forgot about the whole Whomping Willow sequence. Expensive. At that moment though, Ron's red hair starts to burn through Crabbe's roots and the two make a run for it. They make it all the way back to the girls' bathroom without stopping and before finally locking eyes and falling onto the floor, just howling with laughter. Next up though from there, Harry will find the diary in the very same girls' bathroom one day and quickly figures out how to use it and learns that it was apparently Hagrid responsible for last opening the Chamber of Secrets. Ron with Jeff in the hospital wing and Ernie pretty sure that it's Harry doing the attacks and Ron knowing it's not, finds himself hanging out with his brother during mealtimes in the Great Hall where Harry tells him about the diary. From there, Ron is also able to add in that T.M. Riddle got an award for services to the school 50 years prior, but is surprised to hear about Hagrid.
Because I kept burping up slugs over Tom Riddle's trophy.
Meanwhile, Ginny is curious what Ron is doing at the Gryffindor table, so she pops over to say hi and overhears the diary discussion, and Ron, wanting to share his newfound openness with his family, fills her in. She looks absolutely horror-struck, and boy howdy, I wonder why. We all know why. We've all read the books. And if you haven't, you're watching this video, then wow, thanks for being here. But you kind of know what happens from here. Ginny steals the diary back, which causes Harry to hear the voice in the walls again because she's writing in the diary, which means that she's being controlled by the basilisk, which means she's doing the voice in the walls again. Well, she's not, the snake is. The snake is a girl though, I think. This sparks Hermione to realize that it's a snake, even specifically that it's a basilisk, but she gets attacked before she's able to tell anyone about it. And interestingly, this happens right before the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff takes place, which usually fuels the tension between Harry and Ron. Hermione's attack, though, strikes a chord with Ron, who realizes what a blow this must be to Harry and finishes off any lingering concerns that could have remained that Harry could have been somehow involved and suggests that they go and see Hagrid, which they do later that night. Neville does come too, as he's still pretty involved in all of this investigating. He just wasn't there for Christmas and all the polyjuice punching. At Hagrid's, the three boys watch as Hagrid and Dumbledore are taken from the school and get the tip about the spiders, which they soon after follow into the woods. They encounter Aragog as usual, who tells them that Hagrid was framed and then he eats Neville, not before punching him in the face. No, I'm just kidding, but can you imagine? It's only almost always you, Neville. But as the narrators of this story, it isn't. Thankfully, the car shows up to save the day, and Harry now can tell Ron that he doesn't care what their mom says. Flying the car to school was bloody brilliant. Things are honestly looking up for the brothers, and when they get back to school, Ron realizes that Moaning Myrtle might have been the victim of the monster 50 years ago. If they could just get a chance to talk to her, maybe they could confirm this theory. So later that week, Harry and Neville are able to slip away from Lockhart's escort to go and try to talk to Myrtle, but get intercepted by McGonagall, who they lie to and go see Hermione, where they learn about the basilisk, but before they can tell anyone, y'all, that whole convoluted mess is just in the books. That's how it goes. Ginny is taken to the Chamber of Secrets. Crud muffins. Harry and Neville decide that they need to at least tell Lockhart what they think is in the Chamber of Secrets and where they think it is. Harry decides to also go get Ron, as it is their sister who's down there, and tells Neville they'll meet them at Lockhart's office. But when Harry and Ron arrive at Lockhart's office, they find Neville on the floor, dead.
Why is it always me?
I'm messing with you guys. He's just unconscious. And dead. It's like as soon as Ron and Harry are friends again, Neville immediately feels like a third wheel.
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
We have to include Neville because he's Harry's friend.
They immediately fear that Neville has also been attacked by the basilisk, but then Harry spots Lockhart, wand still outstretched, and immediately disarms him. What have you done to him? Harry and Ron demand. Wandless and with nowhere to go, Lockhart starts telling his story, and Harry and Ron force him along, as per always. They then travel through Moaning Myrtle's bathroom down to the Chamber of Secrets, and the story unfolds how it usually does. The cave-in separates Ron and Lockhart from Harry. Lockhart seizes Ron's bad wand, blasts himself instead of Ron, and dies. No, I'm just kidding, he just wipes his entire memory.
Who am I?
I fear we've been given too much power. Lockhart's memory is erased. So Harry is forced to go on alone and faces down Tom Riddle and the Basilisk, summons Fawkes, pulls the sword, stabs the Basilisk, kills the diary, saves the day. You know the drill. And you know who else does? Ron. 200 points to Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. Awards for special services to the school. Dobby is free. Everyone is happy. Or so you may think. Harry and Ron have been as close as ever over this past stretch. However, despite braving the chamber together, the outcome almost seems lopsided. Like, Ron's 200 points for Hufflepuff are great, but feel kind of pointless when Gryffindor gets them too and wins. Like, yay for the Hufflepuffs coming in second, but who cares about second? And by Harry pulling the sword of Gryffindor, he more than locked his placement within the house that the rest of the Weasleys so resonate with. The house Ron specifically asked not to be in. Plus, all Molly can do as soon as she sees her children is thank Harry over and over again for saving Ginny. Even Fred, George, and Percy are treating the situation as if Harry was the only one down there, never mind the fact that Ron is the one who realized where the chamber was in the first place. And as such, for Ron, it's serious salt in the wound, but it might just be something else as well. Fuel in the motivational tank. Next year, he'll make himself known. Maybe. And in case anybody's wondering about Neville's memory, not to worry, he's still friends with Harry, still knows he's a wizard, all the rest, he just completely forgot about Lockhart, which should be interesting. Okay, so let's kick off with some rather disfortunate news. Yes, I know that's not the right way to say it. Obviously, Harry does not spend this year at the Dursleys, which is of course great news for him, but it's also good news for Aunt Marge, and I simply cannot abide by that at all. Because it means that this puppy drowning wench, am I allowed to say that? Does not get hot air ballooned and instead just has, what, a normal fun visit to her brothers? Ugh.
Gross. Freaking idiot.
I suppose if it spares Harry some trouble, it's okay, but still. Either way, that also means Harry never flees the house to go on the run and therefore does not encounter Sirius on Magnolia Crescent or accidentally call the night bus or spend several weeks living alone at the Leaky Cauldron. The potentially more impactful question is, though, what about his Hogsmeade form? Now, the first half of Harry's summer is way better than usual because he's at the Weasleys the entire time hanging out with his brothers and sister, living it up Quidditch style. Of course, they can't do a heck of a lot of seeker practice, but Harry, Ron, Fred, and George play a lot of two-a-side Quidditch, one keeper, one chaser, and as you can imagine, between four brothers, things get very competitive. In fact, after several weeks, Ron and Harry agree to a keeping bet. Fred and George will each take turns shooting on them, and whoever stops more shots wins, and the loser has to wear the house badge of the winner for the rest of the summer. It's kind of like Quidditch tryouts in year 6, and Harry happily agrees since he has an obvious advantage, his Nimbus 2000. This turns out not to be the advantage that he thinks it is. Keeping is more about feeling and reading your opponent. A fast broom might help you make a better save if you go the right way, but if you fall for a feint, there just simply isn't enough time to react. And that said, Harry still has very good instincts and manages to stop 4 of George's shots. But then to Fred, George, and Harry's surprise, Ron reads every shot perfectly and stops all 5 of Fred's, and thus Harry must spend the rest of the summer sporting a Hufflepuff badge every day. And the rest of the summer, much to even more of the Weasley surprise, is spent in Egypt after they win the lottery draw. 700 galleons, woohoo! And what fun they all have, exploring crypts, seeing mutant skeletons, buying souvenir pocket sneakoscopes, watching said sneakoscope go off when Fred and George put beetles into Percy's soup. It's a grand old time! Until, earlier in their trip, some rather frightening news hits the Daily Prophet. Sirius Black has broken out of Azkaban prison. Dun dun dun! Obviously, Molly and Arthur immediately start freaking out as they quickly jump to the conclusion that their son is likely his target, but as usual, refrain from telling him the whole truth, fearing that Harry would go looking for Sirius Black. They do decide, however, that Hogwarts is probably the safest place for Harry, and in the meantime, keeping him in as publicly crowded places and away from their home where Black might be able to find him is the smartest move. So, after just a single night back at home from Egypt, friendship, they decide to live out the final few days of summer at the Leaky Cauldron, trusting in the safety of numbers and the Ministry's ability to secretly help guard Harry while he's there. On the morning of their departure by Floo Powder, though, Harry steps into the grate, throws his powder down, and shouts, "Diagon Alley!" And in the brief moment before he's spun out of the burrow, thinks he sees the form of a massive black dog outside of the Weasleys' window. Sirius usually tries to see Harry before heading to Hogwarts, but this time he can try and make it like one easy stop, since Peter and Harry are both at the burrow. Unfortunately for him, the Weasley strategy pays off and Peter is safe in Diagon Alley for the rest of the summer. But still not that safe. As usual, they encounter Hermione, who buys Crookshanks, who immediately begins tormenting Scabbers. Also, I think Neville shows up one day to buy books with Harry and Hermione and remarks how odd it is that they haven't needed a new Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook since year 1, to which Harry and Hermione are like, Neville, we had 7 new books last year. Whilst in Diagon Alley, everybody also has the opportunity to gawk appreciatively at the firebolt and hunkers down at the Leaky Cauldron to finish off the summer. And now you might wonder if Hermione would still stay with the Weasleys if Hermione and Ron aren't as good of pals this time around, but don't forget, Harry is their son as well, so really they are extending the exact same courtesy that they always do, it's just for Harry instead of Ron. Which, by the way, doesn't that sound familiar? Before heading off, though, Mr. Weasley still tells Harry and Ron that Black is likely hunting Harry and that he needs to be safe at school. Ron wonders why he's being pulled into this conversation as well, and here is when Mr. and Mrs. Weasley explain that after much consideration, they don't think Harry should go to Hogsmeade until it's safe. And in the name of keeping things fair, they will not be allowing Ron to go either. After all, the two of them have been known to get into dangerous situations together. Ron obviously feels like this is wildly unfair and directs his anger towards Harry as if it's his fault for being targeted and preventing Ron from getting to go to Hogsmeade. On the train, Ron does not sit with Harry, Hermione, and Neville, who still end up in Lupin's car. Ron, of course, wants to reunite with all of his Hufflebuds, Ernie and Jeff, which, as a reminder, is Justin Finch-Fletchley. And kind of understandably, Ron is still pretty steamed about the Hogsmeade situation. But alas, the Dementors still come and search the train, and Harry has his usual bout of fainting and hears his parents being killed by Voldemort, and the whole school quickly hears about it. And you might think that Ron would privately enjoy this information, but he does remember the Mirror of Erised, and it's a fresh reminder for him that Harry's life is not some constant glorious moment in the sunlight. What Ron doesn't mind, however, is that because of the fainting, Harry and Hermione get pulled aside and miss the opening feast. It's not a huge deal, but it does mean that Harry misses seeing Ron sitting with a new friend from the train over at the Hufflepuff table. Who could that be? Past that, though, the first week is what you'd expect, care of magical creatures with Hagrid, the new professor who is teaching about hippogriffs, but Ron is not there for the Malfoy incident because Gryffindor has that class with Slytherin. Actually, as a result, Ron doesn't get to interact with the hippogriffs at all, since Hagrid immediately abandons the plan after his first class goes just so badly. Then, arriving at divination, Neville is quick to notice how Hermione, who had been searching for the tower with them, is quick to disappear at the bottom of the ladder, only to suddenly reappear, emerging through the trapdoor moments before class begins. She was right next to us. Then I couldn't find her anywhere. Now she's back? There's nowhere to have gone. Don't be ridiculous, Neville. You're just forgetting where she was standing, responds Harry, and Neville flushes in embarrassment. Meanwhile, Harry interprets Neville's cup as a moon with a half moon on each side of it. Which, and I looked this up, means bad at time management, an interpretation Neville looks relieved at. Then, obviously, Trelawney comes and pronounces Harry as good via grim as dead and sends them along their way. What a great first day of class. Harry laughs it off, though, with Neville and Hermione, but can't help but recall the sighting of the dog outside the window before he left the burrow. Had it really been there? Yes, it had. During the rest of the week, Malfoy continues to feign injury from Buckbeak, and Harry has his first Defense Against the Dark Arts class with Lupin. It goes exactly as you might expect, except Neville's fear is different. Rather than Snape emerging, it's... Me. Lockhart. Neville looks terrified. "Who are you?" he shouts. While Neville can't remember anything about who Lockhart is, his face and the associated attack on Neville keeps haunting his dreams. names. No matter how he dwells on the face or is even told who it is, the information refuses to stick in his mind at all. And so he is tormented not just by Lockhart's face, but also the idea of losing his mind. The rest of the class laughs at the sight of Lockhart as Neville's fear, which stuns the boggart long enough for Lupin to coach Neville through the situation, and he successfully transforms the Beau Gilderoy into Snape wearing his grandmother's clothes, because, I mean, why would we even change that? We're not cutting you any breaks, Snape. None. Lupin then blocks Harry from facing the boggart and sees the glowing orb, yada yada yada, you know the rest. And as the school year gets underway, so do Quidditch tryouts, and an eager Oliver Wood books the pitch early for practice, only to discover the Hufflepuffs are there as well. Diggory, what are you doing? We booked the pitch. Oh, hey there, Oliver. Gosh, I hope I'm not causing too much of a fuss. I booked the pitch for practice today. I know it might be a bit of an inconvenience for you and your team, eh? But I did check with Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout, and they both said it was all clear on my end. Honest mistake, I'm sure. I wouldn't want to step on your toes or anything like that. We have apparently made Cedric Diggory Canadian, and I don't hate it. He hands a note to Oliver, signed off by the heads of houses, explaining the situation, and literal steam is coming out of Oliver's ears. If you want, we could try to figure out a way to share the field to take turns, eh? I mean, I wouldn't want to leave you and the Gryffindors in a tough spot. We're all just trying to do our best out here, right? Looking straight through that kindness, Oliver responds, "You've got a new keeper then. Who is it?" And from behind the taller Cedric steps Ron. The rest of the Gryffindors turn to Harry, Fred, and George, who are just as surprised as anyone else. "See you there then, boys and girls," says Cedric as he and the Hufflepuffs mount their brooms and begin warming up. Oliver watches aghast as Ron makes several impressive saves almost right away. "We think you're good too, Oliver," says George. "Spanking good keeper," says Fred. Those are canon remarks that were too good to leave out. Harry actually watches on proudly as Ron deftly spun to block a particularly difficult shot through his rightmost hoop, knowing that their training all summer had apparently paid off, but was surprised that Ron hadn't mentioned wanting to try out for the team. Either way, Ron's confidence is palpable in the weeks that follow as he's begun to get a bit of recognition from the rest of his house for securing the open position on the team. It turns out that while everyone else was giving Harry most of the credit for the Chamber of Secrets last year, his house had remembered him. And all was well as the school marched towards the Halloween feast until the morning of Halloween itself, when the first Hogsmeade visit was set to take place. While excited murmurs filled the Great Hall, both Harry and Ron stared blankly at their breakfast, knowing that they'd be stuck alone back at the castle whilst everyone else enjoys the trip to town. Harry, to his credit, tried to talk to Ron and congratulate him about the Quidditch team, but Ron still blames him for not being allowed to go into town, so they spend the day apart, and Harry finds himself in Lupin's office, where they discuss fear and Dementors.
I suggest that what you fear the most is fear itself. This is very wise.
The rest of the day, though, does turn around for the Halloween feast, where everything is delicious, but afterwards, the castle is put on lockdown as it's discovered that the barrels of vinegar outside the Hufflepuff common room have been destroyed by Sirius Black. In case you're not aware, the way that you get into the Hufflepuff common room is by tapping a barrel next to the entrance in just the right spot to the tune of Helga Hufflepuff. Did I do that right? Yeah. My Hufflepuffs out there? Right cadence? Do we approve? Can you imagine if you need to get back to the common room to use the bathroom and you're a little bit more urgent than usual and you're like, Helga Hufflepuff! Barrel explodes and you're covered in vinegar and still have to go to the bathroom. On that exact note though, a house elf from the nearby kitchens watched as Sirius Black tapped the wrong tune on the wrong barrel and got doused in vinegar, because that is what happens if you get it wrong. Enraged, Black had smashed the whole barrel and fled the scene. And the smell of the vinegar filled the halls for the rest of the night, but spread out too much for anyone to follow any kind of trail and didn't seem to lead towards any exit or window. As usual, the school is gathered in the Great Hall that night for safety, and Harry finds Ron to ask what happened and to see if he's okay. The seriousness of the situation has brought Ron's anger back down to earth, and he realizes the threat to his brother is very real, and the two wonder why Black attacked the Hufflepuff common room if he's supposed to be after Harry. "The bet," Ron whispers to Harry. "You were wearing my Hufflepuff badge during the summer, and there was that photo of us in the Daily Prophet. He could have seen you and thought you were in Hufflepuff." "Wow, good thing you're such a good keeper, Harry says, realizing Ron must be right. You might not be thinking that after our match, though, Ron replies. Unbeknownst to the brothers, though, that match is actually fast approaching as Marcus Flint reschedules the Slytherin versus Gryffindor match to let Draco's arm heal.
It's killed me. It's killed me.
Instead, the season will now kick off with Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, and the desire for Harry and Ron to defeat each other rises. Usually, Ron's nerves before Quidditch are a huge problem for him, but this go round he finds himself highly motivated with a lot to prove and the confidence-boosting friendship and respect of Cedric Diggory. Ron is ready. And then as the match kicks off in a thunderstorm, he proves just that. Ron is a key part of Cedric's plan. He expects the weather will make the snitch much harder to catch, so if Ron can keep the Gryffindor chasers at bay, hopefully Hufflepuff can build up enough of a lead to make Harry irrelevant. This strategy plays out extremely well. Harry's glasses are fogged by the rain for a good portion of the start, and the snitch is nowhere in sight, and neither is Gryffindor on the scoreboard. And it's not that they're not getting looks, it's just that Ron is blocking them all, and the score quickly jumps to 120-0 when Wood calls a timeout. This is where Hermione finally shows up and reminds them that they can do magic and waterproofs Harry's glasses, a game changer, but it won't matter if Harry can't find the snitch before Hufflepuff scores 3 more times. Harry returns to this guy with renewed vigor and vision. Angelina shoots, blocked. Harry circles the field again. Then he hears it over the intercom. Hufflepuff scores 130-0. Tension is rising. The Hufflepuffs can feel the victory. A frustrated Fred sends a bludger at Ron and gets a foul called. Hufflepuff scores on the penalty 140-0. Harry is frantic and searching the sky as fast as he can when a huge bolt of lightning strikes, and in the top stands the black dog. Harry blinks and the lightning strikes again and the dog is gone, but where it was, the snitch. Harry takes off, racing towards the flying ball. Cedric sees him and takes the chase as well. The wind is blowing Harry off course. Cedric's weight is an advantage, but it doesn't matter. Harry has the lead. Almost there, Harry thinks to himself, and then everything goes cold. Step aside, step aside. No, not Harry, not Harry. The Dementors have flooded the stadium. Everything goes white. Harry falls, Cedric catches the snitch. Hufflepuff wins. But as per always, Harry's Nimbus is blown right into the Whomping Willow where it is destroyed, and he wakes up surrounded by his team in the hospital wing. This should otherwise be a huge win for Ron, who played absolutely lights out, but one way or another, the game has an asterisk placed against it because even by Cedric's own admission, Harry would have captured the snitch had the Dementors not impeded with the match. Poor Ron, hopefully things start looking up for him soon, though if I'm being honest, I kind of doubt it. At least he's got Cedric, for now. The lost match to Hufflepuff also lights a pretty big fire under Harry as well, who then seeks out Lupin to help him find a way to combat the Dementors should it be a problem in a future match. And as ever, Lupin promises to teach him after the break for the winter holidays. Before we get to Christmas though, we do still have a couple of big events left. The first thing happens super off page in the main story, but in the wake of everyone discussing Gryffindor's loss to Hufflepuff as a fluke, Ron's confidence is absolutely rocked. And as such, in his next match, and now I'm quoting from the main story, Ravenclaw flattened Hufflepuff. That's tough, buddy. Hopefully Ron's not eventually upset about the fact that Harry likes Jo, who just beat him at Quidditch, and then ends up dating Cedric, who ends up... Guys. Who's to say where the story is going to go? But then there's also one more Hogsmeade weekend on the horizon, and notably, it's usually Harry being the target of Sirius Black and the recent incident on the Quidditch pitch / the loss to Hufflepuff, and Harry's inability to go to Hogsmeade that leads Fred and George to bequeathing the Marauders map to him. And the same holds true on this particular instance, except we must not forget that this go around, Ron is also not permitted to Hogsmeade, and also just lost the Quidditch match. Embarrassingly. So, upon receiving the map and knowing that Ron also can't go, Harry immediately seeks him out to share the news and invite him along. Ron is crushed that Fred and George thought to give it to Harry over himself, especially when he's also been having a rough go of things. But he also can't resist the temptation to explore the secret passage out of the castle and catch a glimpse of Honeydukes and the Three Broomsticks. So together, the boys overhear Fudge and company discussing Sirius and how he was best friends with James and Lily and how he ultimately betrayed them. Ron sees the look of despair on Harry's face, who is just rendered speechless. Despite trying to help, Harry remains completely silent all the way back to the castle. Which, in case you need a refresher, that's like a 50-minute underground walk. And this speeds us along to Christmas morning, where Harry's spirits are lifted a little bit when he is unexpectedly gifted a firebolt with no note. Even with as few people as remain in the castle, the word about the firebolt travels like a firebolt, and before long, Ron hears the news. And so he quickly pulls Harry aside to hear more about it and who it came from when Harry explains that he doesn't know. "You don't know who sent it?" Ron asked, brow furrowed. "No idea, but I've got to run," responds Harry, and Ron watches him take off up the marble staircase with a growing look of concern. Later that night is the Christmas feast, where Harry can't help but notice that Ron won't make eye contact with him. Worried, Harry heads back to Gryffindor Tower to distract himself by inspecting the firebolt when, unexpectedly, not only McGonagall, who Harry had rarely ever seen in the common room before, enters, followed by none other than Ron. "So that's it, is it?" said Professor McGonagall beadily, walking over to the fireside and staring at the firebolt. "Mr. Weasley has just informed me that you have been sent a broomstick, Potter." 2 words. Uh-oh. "How could you do that?" Harry shouts at Ron in the now empty common room. "Because I think, and Professor McGonagall agrees with me," he added, "that Sirius Black probably sent that broom." Harry just stares at him. Black is on the run. How is he supposed to get a firebolt? It's not like he can just walk in and buy one. "Harry, you heard what he did when we were in Hogsmeade, how he betrayed your parents. If he's capable of that, then I'm sure stealing a firebolt is nothing to him. What's a robbery if he gets to kill you? You only even heard that story because I shared the map with you so we could both go to Hogsmeade, and this is how you repay me?" shot back Harry. "They'll give it back after they strip it down. If nothing's wrong, then won't it have been better to check? And what condition will it be in then? You're just mad because you know Gryffindor was about to win our Quidditch match before the Dementors showed up. You think if I have a firebolt, there is no chance of Hufflepuff winning the Quidditch Cup." And this time, Harry had struck a nerve. "Fine," shouted Ron. "Get yourself killed." And with that, he turned through the portrait hole and slammed the fat lady shut, heading back to his own common room. So the question here is Ron acting out of concern for Quidditch, or is he genuinely concerned about Black, or maybe both? As school begins again, Harry, as usual, begins taking Patronus lessons with Lupin, and is motivated as ever to win their next Quidditch match and stick it to Ron. Several lessons in, Harry still can't produce a true Patronus, but they can produce a consistent silver mist. Lupin tells him he's doing well, and that it must run in the family. By now, Harry and Lupin have talked about Black, and Harry beams with pride at the thought of his father producing a Patronus as well. Meanwhile, Harry's broom is still being inspected by the teachers. In fact, even in the main story, it takes a month to run all of the tests, which, like, why? Like, maybe just tension, I suppose, and indeed, tension is high. Now, usually it's Hermione who turns in Harry for the firebolt, and she who is on the receiving end of Harry and Ron's scorn. And while she can still see where Ron is coming from, and since it is way more personal between the two of them, she and Neville just support Harry. Fred and George also feel pretty icy towards Ron and feel pretty confident it has everything to do with Quidditch and nothing to do with any genuine concern about Sirius Black. But things do start to look up at long last. The firebolt is returned to Harry just in time for the match against Ravenclaw. The match goes almost the same as usual. Harry's firebolt spurs on all the Gryffindors to superior play, and the Ravenclaws just can't keep pace. But Cho, who Harry still thinks is very pretty, is marking Harry closely and making things difficult for him. He thinks he spies the snitch when suddenly there is a gasp from the crowd, and Harry, catching Hermione and Neville's eye, sees what they are all pointing at.
2 huge Dementors entering the pitch. Harry knows what he has to do and whips the firebolt around to get a straight run at them, readying his wand. As he comes about though, he sees the Dementors are not focused on him or the crowd. Ron was on the field, wand held high, shooting what looked like a silver mist towards the Dementors, who were thoroughly undeterred. At that exact moment though, Harry noticed Cho fly past him at full speed and saw far ahead of her, the snitch. There was no time to think. Harry bolted towards the Dementors, one eye on the ground, one on Cho. "Expecto Patronum," he shouted, and was vaguely aware of a whooshing silver blast exiting his wand. But there was no time to check. He pulled the firebolt up and urged it forward, drawing even closer with Cho. The snitch was feet away. It veered sharply up and Cho shot past it, not adjusting fast enough. But Harry stayed on course and yes, caught it. Gryffindor wins. Post-match, it is of course revealed that the Dementors were not true Dementors at all, but members of the Slytherin team who were trying to unnerve Harry. That's why Ron's Patronus Mist wasn't repelling them. On the other hand though, Harry's took complete form and bowled them over, or so told a very impressed Ron to Harry afterward. But he's not the only one who's impressed. "I didn't know you could cast a Patronus," Harry said to Ron when they finally got some separation from the rejoicing crowd of Gryffindors. Ron explained how he'd felt wrong about the firebolt and wanted to prove that he wasn't concerned about Quidditch and cared much more for Harry's safety. "I knew you were taking lessons with Lupin to make sure the Dementors didn't knock you off your broom again. I thought if I could do the same, it would prove I didn't care about the cup." Harry is astonished by Ron's actions and impressed with how far he'd come. "Your charm looked great. That's about as far as I've come in my lessons with Lupin as well." "Are you kidding?" Ron asked. "Yours was corporeal. I couldn't see its shape because it was so bright and knocked me down too, but it was massive." "It's okay. I was a hero in the common room for getting rid of the firebolt, even though that's not why I did it," he added quickly. "Christmas was lonely though. Did I tell you Scabbers ran away the same day McGonagall took the firebolt?" From there, the two parted back to their dorms. Harry was sure there would be a long party into the night celebrating Gryffindor's victory. But while the Gryffindors were celebrating, the Hufflepuffs had a much different evening. Ron enjoyed some light praise in the common room for his attempted bravery at the match, and Cedric even came over to let him know how impressed he was with Ron's Patronus. Even just producing the mist is very difficult. After turning in for the night though, no! I know, it does seem excessive, but that's a direct quote from Ron in the book, by the way. Sirius Black attacks the Hufflepuff common room again, this time making it as far as Ron's dorm room before scampering. Once more, the castle is searched, and once more, Harry and Ron confer and figure that Black still hasn't realized that Harry is actually in Gryffindor because of the newspaper clipping of Harry wearing the Hufflepuff badge over the summer. This second attack and Black's ability to penetrate the castle combined with Ron's attempts at learning the Patronus spell to help protect him make the entire situation with Black seem much graver than even in the main story. And so when the next Hogsmeade visit arrives, the one where Draco usually spies Harry's floating head up at the Shrieking Shack, the two boys uncharacteristically decide to just stay at the castle. This would typically seem pretty dull, but it's almost as if each is doing the other a favor by staying behind, and rather than just mope around, they decide they actually have a somewhat responsible plan. Since they've been taking separate lessons with Lupin, they decide to drop in on him to see if they can have a joint lesson together, and given the danger Sirius Black is posing, just offer him the map. And that might sound out of character, but unlike in the main story where it seems like a mistake that Ron's bed is attacked by Black, Harry feels he is the one endangering Ron, and given the lengths Ron has gone to helping catch Black, feels like more of a responsibility. Plus, Lupin is a teacher, the likes of which he has not had before, who they both really feel like they can trust. Thus, Harry and Ron drop in on a pleasantly surprised Lupin, who indeed allows them some Patronus practice. Ron, to this point, has only been practicing casting the spell with no opposing force. His boggart is an acromantula, so they can't use it for practice. But Harry being present allows him to go against a Dementor boggart, which he has a harder time against. Meanwhile, Harry, despite having cast the Patronus in the Quidditch match, is just back to the Silver Mist. And after the lesson, Harry reveals the map to Lupin, whose eyes go wide at the sight of the old parchment. "How did you come to own this, Harry?" he asked. I found it Harry responds evasively. Responds Lupin with a knowing smile. I happen to know for a fact that this map was confiscated by Mr. Filch many years ago, but I must thank you for bringing it to my attention, and don't worry, I won't mention where I got it either, but I do think you should let me hold on to it for the time being. And so Harry surrenders the map to Lupin, hoping it will help catch Black and keep the rest of his family safe in the meantime. Getting back to Quidditch, you know, the important things, Ron recovers from the loss against Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff stomps Slytherin, leaving just one final match of the year, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. And with Hufflepuff with 2 wins, Gryffindor has a chance at the cup if they can win and overcome the point margin. Given that Slytherin is out of the running now, all they really can do is play spoiler, and since Harry blasted Malfoy with the Patronus earlier in the year, he's eager for a Gryffindor loss. Here's where we're at. Gryffindor needs to be up by 50 when Harry catches the snitch. Don't worry, we did the math. So that early in the match, Malfoy doesn't even bother marking Harry and instead focuses all of his energy on disrupting the Gryffindor chasers' play, and he's rather effective. Harry spots the snitch twice, but has to hold back on seeking it because Gryffindor isn't ahead by 50 quite yet. But this is when an idea strikes him. He yells at Malfoy, "You know, you really can't win. Even if we don't win by 50, my brother will still get the cup. You can't beat us both." Malfoy takes the bait and abandons his disruption play, thinking that he can at least still win this game against Harry. But as he seeks the snitch more earnestly and abandons the chasers, Gryffindor quickly recovers and scores the necessary lead. Harry frantically searches the field when he catches Ron's eye in the crowd and notices that he's subtly pointing to the bottom of the Slytherin goalpost. Harry follows his finger and the snitch. He dives. Malfoy takes chase, but it's no use. The firebolt is simply too fast. Malfoy watches helplessly as Harry zooms forward faster and faster until it's over. Harry catches the snitch and Gryffindor wins the cup. The celebration and associated euphoria lasts Harry the rest of the school year, and him and Ron are on as good a terms as they've been in a while, with Ron privately sharing some of the glory for the cup, having helped Harry to catch the snitch. But then comes exams, and the pending trial with Buckbeak, which by the way has still been happening. It turns out Hagrid, without as much help from Ron and Hermione, still loses. Who knew? Exams are as boring as ever though, except for Harry's divination exam, where, as usual, Trelawney goes into her trance and delivers the second prophecy about Wormtail reuniting with Voldemort. Yuck. Unsure if the prophecy he just heard was real or a joke, but concerned that it's real and about Black, Harry meets up with Neville, who's waiting for him at the bottom of the silver ladder, and quickly tells him what he's heard. He's also anxious to find Ron and tell him what he's just heard, given the attacks and all they've been through together this year. And he finds him on his way back to the Hufflepuff common room, having just finished his own Defense Against the Dark Arts exam. "Did pretty well," Ron exclaimed. "Only got tripped up by the hinky punk. Better than Jeff. He couldn't handle the Grindylows. What's the matter, Harry?" Harry quickly tells him what happened in Trelawney's, and the boys decide it's best to go and tell Lupin what they heard. But before they can, Hermione shows up with a note from Hagrid, saying Buckbeak is going to be executed. This sidetracks the foursome, and they head to Hagrid's instead, where Ron is reunited with Scabbers, who, it turns out, has been hiding in Hagrid's hut this whole time. Upon spying Fudge and the executioner coming down to Hagrid's, the 4 kids head out the back and begin making their way back up to the castle, but Scabbers is going crazy in Ron's hands. Then, the unmistakable sound of a swishing axe, you know the one, from Hagrid's distracts them just long enough for Scabbers to escape as they assume Buckbeak is dead. Ron lunges for him, but to his surprise, it's Neville who takes chase. Neville is no stranger to pets making runs for freedom, and with the skill of only someone who has had lengthy practice at leaping for a runaway toad, makes a truly stunning capture of the loose rat. Neville turns around, proudly holding Scabbers, only to be immediately tackled by the huge black dog. "Neville!" the other 3 shout in unison, but as they try to help him, Crookshanks appears in front of them and they trip. They're forced to watch as Neville is dragged helplessly towards the Whomping Willow and then under the willow. Everyone has a lovely time getting walloped by the tree as they try to make their way to the center before Crookshanks makes it and presses the knot that freezes the tree. Confused, the trio makes their way through the underground passage where they finally emerge in the Shrieking Shack and find an injured Neville who is still clutching Scabbers and looks petrified. For clarity, petrified like scared, not like basilisk. The door slams and the waxy figure of Sirius Black emerges from the shadows, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione crowd around Neville. "At last," Black croaks. "Been hiding out at the burrow this whole time, have you? But no matter, I have found you at last, and now it's time to die." Black advances, holding Neville's wand. "No! If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to go through all of us," shouts Ron, stepping forward. "And Harry's not hiding out there. The burrow is his home." Black just laughs. "Ha! Your father was like my brother as well, Harry. But step aside, boy. There will only be one murder tonight." Sirius. Why you gotta be so vague, man? Why you gotta be so vague? "Expelliarmus!" Harry shouts from behind Ron, and Black falls back, disarmed. And now Harry advances. The moment he's been waiting for has suddenly presented itself to him. The man who betrayed his parents is alone and helpless before him. All Harry has to do is cast his spell. But
Expelliarmus!
Lupin arrives in the room, disarming Harry. And we know what happens now. Sirius explains himself, Snape arrives, Snape gets knocked out, Peter is revealed and captured, and everyone heads back out of the Whomping Willow. "I don't know if anyone ever told you. I'm your godfather. Your parents appointed me your guardian," said Sirius stiffly. "If anything happened to them..." Harry waited. Did Sirius mean what he thought he meant? "I'll understand, of course, if you want to stay with Molly and Arthur," said Sirius. "But, well, think about it. Once my name is cleared, if you wanted a different home..." Oh, see, it's getting good, because normally it's like, obviously he wants to leave the Dursleys, but now he lives at the burrow. But before Harry can give the matter another thought. "Oh my god, Lupin is a werewolf!" Sirius transforms to fend him off, Peter escapes, and sadly Neville is too injured to perform another daring toad capture on him this time. Instead, Ron takes chase after the rat into the darkness. Harry and Hermione turn their attention to yells coming from the lake. They take off and can see Sirius now as a man again, being swarmed by the Dementors. Before they can get close though, more Dementors have swarmed around them. Harry pulls out his wand and tries to fight them off, but their numbers are thick. "Gotcha!" Ron stands victorious, having recaptured Scabbers, and is not being gentle about restraining him. A rustle in the distance distracts him though, as he looks up and sees the Dementors floating towards the lake, and hears Harry's cries of Expecto Patronum. Next to Harry, Hermione collapses. Harry has not been able to even summon any mist to make his way to Sirius. The cold is surrounding him. His mother's screams fill his ears when suddenly, warmth. A gleaming silver badger leaps over his head and circles Harry protectively. The Dementors flee, and Harry stares down at it in disbelief when Ron arrives beside him. "Nice one! Quick, take Hermione back to the castle. I'll go get Sirius." Ron obeys without hesitation as Harry rushes off. The Dementors are about to perform the kiss when Harry arrives and, with renewed vigor, casts his spell again. Expecto Patronum. A huge cloud of silver mist appears and drives off the Dementor nearest Sirius, but it's not enough. Harry directs his wand left and right, driving away Dementor after Dementor. But there are simply too many. The cold returns, the screams return. Harry collapses when across the lake he sees someone else, and a large silver something galloping towards him. He passes out and wakes up in the hospital wing. When he wakes up, Hermione and Ron fill him in on everything that happened. "Did you catch Pettigrew?" Harry asked Ron. "I did, but I got distracted when I cast my Patronus. I lost my grip, and he managed to bite me and wriggle free," Ron responded, holding up his bitten hand. But just then, Dumbledore walks in and gives Hermione his permission to go all time-turnery, and because Ron is uninjured this time, he actually gets to join Harry and Hermione. Hey, that's fun! So the three of them go back in time 3 turns per Dumbledore's instructions and make their way back out of the castle and down to Hagrid's, where they pull Buckbeak into the forest. Then they watch as everyone disappears into the Whomping Willow and then later re-emerge. "This is so weird," comments Harry and Ron together. They look on as Lupin transforms and Sirius attacks him and watch as Ron chases after Scabbers. Buckbeak clicks his beak and Harry realizes that Lupin is headed straight for them and that they need to move. But then Ron has a sudden realization. "Hang on," he says, and then bolts in the opposite direction of Harry and Hermione. "Ron!" yells Harry. "Harry, there's no time! Let's go," said Hermione, pulling him in the opposite direction across the lake. And together they watch as the Dementors descend upon themselves and Sirius. They watch as Ron's silver badger arrives to save them and then dissipates as Peter bites his hand. Harry realizes he is standing exactly where the other Patronus was coming from earlier in the night. could it be? He wonders if his father is about to appear on the grounds to save him, but then realizes the truth. The huge silver stag emerges from Harry's wand and drives off the Dementors, saving himself and Sirius.
Expecto Patronum!
Snape emerges and carts Harry and Sirius up to the castle, where Hermione and Harry then free Sirius with Buckbeak and make their way back to the hospital wing. "What about Ron?" Harry whispers to Hermione as they round the corner. "About time you showed up," says a familiar voice. They look up to see Ron standing outside the doors looking triumphant and holding in a tight grasp Pettigrew. When I caught him the first time, I heard some rustling in the trees and thought I saw someone. And good thing too, because it's when I spotted you lot being swarmed by the Dementors. That's when Pettigrew bit me. I didn't think about it again until we went back, and then I realized the noise I heard, it must have been me. I was the only one who knew where I was, so I found myself and waited for Pettigrew to escape, and he held up the rat proudly. "Very well done, Mr. Weasley," came the soft voice of Dumbledore, stepping forward and creating a small silver cage with a flick of his wand. "Good thing the minister is here this evening. I have a feeling he'll want to see for himself that Peter Pettigrew is in fact still alive. I think if we act fast enough, we can still make the evening profit." "Hospital wing, I think. All of you," Dumbledore said, beaming. "I'll be sure to alert the kitchens to send up some food, and you all need a good night's rest." By the following morning, news had spread like wildfire throughout the castle. Sirius was announced innocent on the front page of the Daily Prophet. The real culprit, Peter Pettigrew, had been captured. Relief was palpable as the school year came to a close, with exams finished and the looming threat of Sirius Black lifted. And although Ron had once again earned some great end-of-year points for Hufflepuff, it still wasn't quite enough to eclipse Gryffindor's position in the House Cup after their Quidditch performance. The final weeks at Hogwarts were some of the most pleasant of Harry's entire life, but two things were still rattling around in the back of his head. What about Trelawney's prediction? Had it all been a hoax? They had stopped Pettigrew from escaping after all. Had the Time Turner allowed them to intervene on fate? And what about Sirius's offer to come live with him? Harry had always loved his life with the Weasleys, but his real parents had named Sirius his godfather. Where would he end up now?
The evening prophet arrived at the Crouch home just as Mr. Barty Crouch was sitting down for his evening tea. It has been yet another long day at the Ministry of Magic, where planning the upcoming Quidditch World Cup had become increasingly complicated the longer the escaped convict, Sirius Black, remained on the loose. He'd written no less than 15 owls that day, assuring foreign ministers that Dementors would be stationed all around the premises and that there was no way Black would gain entrance to the campgrounds or disrupt the match. Ludo Bagman, the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, was no help either. He was a former Quidditch player and was more concerned with who would win the cup and less about the threat of an escaped murderer. "Oh, Barty, Black'll be caught by then, won't he? No use fretting about it." Barty scoffed, remembering the conversation, but little did he know how wrong they were both about to be, for that was the exact moment the owl had delivered the Evening Post. "Black innocent, Pettigrew alive," he shouted in a rare lapse of composure. His house elf Winky dropped the tray she had been carrying, and in the locked bedroom, his son's eyes shot open with a look of clarity they hadn't known in years. Yeah, so Pettigrew may have been caught, but as you can see, news of his capture is the very thing that will awaken Voldemort's other 12-year chained servant from Trelawney's prophecy. As a refresher, Barty Crouch Jr. was sent to Azkaban by his own father, but only actually stayed there for a year before being smuggled out and then being held under the Imperius Curse, also by his father, for 12 years. And of course, Wormtail's absence in the situation does offer its own series of complications for Voldemort. Usually it's Peter who abducts Bertha Jorkins and from whom they extract all the information about the Triwizard Tournament. But this time Bertha is just safe. She was an idiot. That's probably still true, but safely an idiot. Nonetheless though, Barty Crouch Jr. breaks free that night and tracks down Voldemort, who is able to instruct him enough to get his rudimentary body back, and they still set out for the Riddle House, where they encounter Frank Bryce, who does still die, so sorry, Frank. Frank's death will be the one used to make Nagini a Horcrux this time rather than Bertha, and upon killing Frank, one Harry James Potter wakes up in his bedroom at his godfather's house. Yeah, it's been a very interesting summer for Harry, who made the very difficult decision to in fact go live with his newly innocent godfather, Sirius Black, rather than returning to his adopted home with the Weasleys. These were Harry's real parents' intentions for him, but it's not entirely selfish. Sirius has been starved for company and living in the misery of his actions for a solid 12 years at this point. And to be fair, usually I'd argue that if it was between the Dursleys and Sirius, Dumbledore would not allow this because of the bond of blood, but as the Weasleys cannot provide that, the door is more open. Molly and Arthur are of course deeply saddened, but totally support Harry and are proud of the man he's growing up to be and assure him that he's always welcome back home whenever he wants. No matter what, he'll always be their son. Ron takes it less well. The two of them have had some adventures together now, and despite differences and jealousy here and there, they always seem to come together and under it all are obviously brothers and do love each other. Plus, there's the fact that Ron himself caught his own pet rat Pettigrew, and this is how Harry responds? By leaving the family? Obviously, there's much more to it than that, but you know, insecurities and heartbreak have a nasty habit of manifesting in regrettable ways. Either way, though, Harry quickly confides the contents of the dream to Sirius, who's been very concerned all summer because Harry has also told him about the prophecy about the servant returning to the master, and while it seemed like it was prevented, it's so hard to know for sure. What bothers me, Harry, is whether the prophecy took into account the use of the time turner. If it did, then it always knew Peter would be caught, and he may never have been the subject at all. Whew, that voice kills me. Harry's dream seemed to confirm his fears. Someone had indeed reunited with Voldemort, who was growing stronger, but who? Alas, earwax, there is not much time to worry about it though, because the Quidditch World Cup is just days away. The Ministry, in an effort to correct their mistake, offered Sirius tickets to the top box, and they even offered Harry tickets for the rest of his extended family. And as you can imagine, it's an odd mix of emotions for Ron getting this particular news. He feels very abandoned by Harry, but top box tickets at the Quidditch World Cup are basically priceless. Unless maybe your brother jinxed a lawnmower or something, smoothing that over feels like worth, like, I don't know, several million galleons. How much do these tickets cost? Seriously though, what did Otto Bagman do to that lawnmower that it was worth 10 top box tickets to, like, the most important game of all time? Or at least that year. Either way, the Ministry is trying to make up for 12 years in Azkaban, so they get as much as they want. Harry invites Hermione and Neville, along with the entirety of the Weasley family, and even gets Ron some extra tickets to invite Ernie. And Jeff, who of course originally was, you know, Justin Finch-Fletchley, but I think we can all agree is now canonically Jeff. However, upon arriving at the Portkey to travel to the World Cup grounds, it turns out that Ron has used the tickets differently than Harry expected and invited Cedric Diggory and his father, Amos. Oh, poor Jeff. He's gonna have to watch from his home using his imagination since wizards don't have TVs. Oh, but wait, he is Muggle-born, but wait, Muggles don't cover Quidditch, so sucks to suck, Jeff. I'm of course just kidding. Mostly. Amos is as insufferable as ever though and mocks Harry for losing to Ron and Cedric. Cedric humbly tries to explain about the Dementors, but Ron privately kind of enjoys the praise. As always though, everyone is enjoying the sights and sounds of the festivities and pick up a batch of omnioculars to go around and run into the members of the Ministry, Ludo and Barty Crouch Sr., who seems notably distracted. They finally make their way up to the stands to take in the game, which is a true stunner. Bulgaria wins, but Aiden Lynch catches the snitch. Like, what? I'm kidding again. Let's not be absurd. Bulgaria's only hope was only ever Crumb getting the snitch before things got out of hand. And if you thought that Dimitrov, Ivanova, and Levesky stood even a chance of getting anything past Barry Ryan, then let's face it, you're kidding yourself. Cedric, of course, is a great resource for Ron this go-around though, spending less time focusing on Crumb and the Seekers and emphasizing some of the professional-grade keeper moves. One in particular goes by the Harry Kane halt, kind of a keeper's Ronski feint, if I may, where one post is guarded, but a rapid spin move on the firebolt creates enough gust to defend the other two hoops. It's limited in application because of the spinning, but when used in a penalty situation or one-on-one, it's virtually unstoppable, Cedric explains. From there, though, the game goes exactly as expected. Ireland wins, Crumb captures the snitch, and they all make their way back to the tents to celebrate the night away. This is of course when the commotion occurs. Former Death Eaters are up to their usual tricks and have suspended Muggles in the air. The big difference is that Sirius is at the game now too, and he isn't having it at all, and immediately races into action where he quickly breaks into a duel, blasting the mask off of none other than the leader, Lucius Malfoy. "I should have known it was you who was nursing Voldemort back to power, Malfoy," barks Sirius. And in Lucius's defense here, he actually has no idea what Sirius is talking about because, as per always, the Death Eaters aren't celebrating the return of Lord Voldemort. They're just terrible people. Of course, from Sirius's point of view, he's been on the lookout for any sign of Death Eater activity that may point back to Voldemort, and here's a shining example with an obvious candidate, so he jumps to the logical conclusion that Lucius was the one the prophecy was referencing. Sadly, this is not actually true, and what really happens is that Lucius is now tipped off that Voldemort actually is on the mend, and he manages to disapparate away from the World Cup situation, and by the next day has set out to explore Sirius's claims. But this actually closes out the events of the Quidditch World Cup though, because surprisingly we'll be without a dark mark as per usual. From there though, we can fast forward just a little bit to the arrival at Hogwarts and the announcement that they will be playing host to the newly returned Triwizard Tournament, and the students from Durmstrang and Beauxbaton will be arriving soon. We are also introduced to Mad-Eye Moody, who will be their new Defense Against Dark Arts professor for the rest of the year, and mostly this first part of the year remains the same. Moody teaches the students about the unforgivable curses, and everyone anxiously awaits the start of the tournament. Neville is, as usual, very distraught about the Cruciatus curse, and as usual, Moody pulls him aside afterward to try and calm him down and offer him a nice book about plants. Finally, Beauxbaton and Durmstrang and what? Ireland seeker Aidan Lynch arrives? I'm just kidding again, it's of course Crumb, although Lynch must have gone to Hogwarts, right? Doesn't matter. Dumbledore explains that no student under the age of 17 will be able to enter their names in the Goblet of Fire to be considered, and that he'll be drawing an age line to ensure that this rule is enforced. I'm still stuck on it though. Like, Bill knew Aidan Lynch though, right? School, same time. Why must I suck on this guy today? Either way, the students excitedly await the results, all discussing who they think will be the Hogwarts champion when evening falls and the goblet is ready to make its decision. With bated breath, students from all three schools watch on as the first name emerges from the goblet. The champion for Durmstrang will be Victor Krum. Harry and Ron catch each other's eyes from across the Great Hall with an appreciative nod. Probably something like this. The champion for Beauxbaton is Fleur Delacour. "Oh look, they're all disappointed," Hermione said over the noise, nodding toward the remainder of the Beauxbaton party. Disappointed was a bit of an understatement, Harry thought. Two of the girls who had not been selected had dissolved into tears and were sobbing with their heads on their arms. Silence then fell as the goblet reared once again to deliver the final champion. The paper shot from the goblet and was gracefully captured by Dumbledore, who paused for only a moment before announcing in a booming voice, "Ronald Weasley." The room erupted, not entirely in applause, but in confusion. Fred and George notably stand in applause for their brother, though heckling Ron for not sharing how he'd entered his name as he rose from the Hufflepuff table with a mingled look of shock, confusion, and pride on his face. Harry himself is rather impressed Ron found a way to enter himself into the contest when Fred and George had been blasted away by the age ring. But then the Great Hall had just started to calm down when the goblet raised its flame once again. Silence fell. Dumbledore stared in amazement as a final piece of parchment erupted and deftly captured in Dumbledore's outstretched hand. "Harry Potter!" he read aloud.
Harry Potter!
Ron, who had almost made his way into the back room, stood stunned for 1, maybe 2 minutes. To his enormous surprise and pleasure, he had been declared school champion. A wink from Cedric when he stood up made him think that he must have had something to do with it, but it didn't matter. Flashes of his reflection in the mirror of Erised had wandered in front of his thoughts.
Hello, good.
Would he finally be able to make a name for himself out of the shadow of his brother? This daze was disrupted, though, when the door from the Great Hall opened for a 4th time, and, of all people, Harry entered the small room. Discussion broke out at once. How was this even possible? Ron's name being entered was mystery enough, being so far underage. But on top of that, 2 Hogwarts champions had been chosen? And not just any 2, but brothers who had a history of breaking rules together. Then, with the deft calmness of a hornet's nest that had just been lit ablaze, Dumbledore asked the boys, "Did you put your name on the goblet of fire?" "No," responded both of the boys in unison. "I haven't a clue how my name got in the goblet," said Harry. "Did you ask an older student to put your name in for you?" Dumbledore asked. Again, both boys answered no, but that's when the door opened again. "Actually, I did do that." It was Cedric, anticipating the confusion. He'd come back to explain that he had put Ron's name in the goblet rather than his own. "Ever since I heard about Ron's Patronus last year taking the form of a badger, I knew he was a true Hufflepuff. Of course, everyone in the house is, but it was just like the school had chosen him, or maybe he chose the house. I don't know, but when the tournament was announced, he had to be our champion, and I was right. The goblet chose him over any other Hogwarts student." And this is where you might be like, would Ron actually edge out like all the other 7th years? And I think that there are 2 major things that are at play here. One is that Ron has like way more real world experience that normally Harry alone uniquely has at this point. And also, Ron isn't directly competing with Cedric or Harry, who was of course entered under the name of a 4th school and just unopposed. Also, Dumbledore in the main story asks Harry if this is how he got around the age line, by using an older student.
You asked one of the older students to do it for you?
No, sir.
And it totally would have worked if anyone had thought about it for more than like a minute. From there though, news of Cedric's decision spreads through the castle like wildfire, where at first people are upset with him for cheating the system, but as they recognize that Ron did still beat out all of the older students, do come to recognize him as the true Hogwarts champion. Harry, on the other hand, has 0 explanation as to what happened, and as such, he is regarded once again as the false champion. Badges immediately spring up around the castle featuring the words, "the flare and the spare," a reference to the Goblet of Fire in Ron's own flame red hair. They even feature a little image of Ron with flickering flames atop his head. And it's not long before the weighing of the wands and the first official Daily Prophet announcement about each of the school champions. Actually, and here's just a fun fact, Ron's original wand, the one that breaks per the Whomping Willow, is actually within a 1/4 inch of being the exact same as Cedric's own wand, 10-inch ash and unicorn hair. He, of course, has the Willow wand now with a unicorn hair, which Ollivander remarks as having a particular propensity for seeking out individuals with great potential, and had the power to enhance advanced forms of magic. Rita Skeeter is also there, who gets fast to work on concocting a narrative, this time focusing less on Harry's tragic past, but on his upbringing with the Weasleys and the sudden fortune he's had in moving out and living with his parents' intended guardian. Much is said about the Weasleys' financial status and how it must have affected the young and heroic Harry Potter growing up in a home that started as a pig pen. This is a weird one, guys. I'm the one concocting this narrative, and that sentence is so infuriating. And you can only imagine how it affects Ron, who as the other Hogwarts champion and a Weasley is hardly mentioned at all, other than as another obstacle Harry will have to overcome, what with competing against his own brother now.
Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
But it does fix his resolve to try and beat Harry and prove his own worth and win his family the 1,000 galleon prize. The obvious issue being he had no idea how to prepare for the first task, which, as usual, remains a mystery to the champions. Or, well, it's supposed to be as usual. Hagrid invites Harry down to see the dragons one night under the invisibility cloak. Madame Maxine is also along for the ride, as usual. Harry stands in shock as he sees each of the massive 4 dragons blasting curtains of flame at the handlers, who are all having to work together to keep them contained. Also, as per usual, on the way back to the castle, Harry encounters Karkaroff on the grounds, headed in the direction of the dragon pens. Ron is going to be the only person who doesn't know, Harry thinks to himself, knowing exactly what he must do. So the next day, he pulls a hesitant Ron aside. "Dragons. The first task is dragons. Hagrid showed me last night. Everyone else knows." Harry hopes that this will prove his allegiance to Ron and the Weasleys, but Ron responds back, "I already know. Charlie is here too. He told me Hagrid showed them to you and thought it was only fair if I was informed as well."
His brother Charlie had to bring him over from Romania. Didn't Ron tell you that?
No, he didn't.
This actually stings Harry a little bit, as Charlie is also his brother, making him feel a little bit more on the outs and worried that Rita Skeeter's article is impacting the Weasleys' opinion of him. Harry tries to give him a genuine smile as a group of students walk by wearing their pins. Just don't turn into a real flare out there, okay? From there, tackling the dragon problem is actually quite different as well. Normally, Harry nearly gets advice from Sirius, who has to make a sudden departure from their flu powder Zoom call in the Gryffindor common room. This time though, Sirius is just a handy resource who can advise Harry on using the conjunctivitis curse and to aim for the dragon's eyes, so there's no need for the firebolt this time around. On the other hand, Ron has to make his own preparations, but is able to at least confide in Cedric and ask for help, which he's willing to do because, it's kind of his fault that Ron's in the tournament anyway. He suggests his own tactic of turning a rock into a dog, or maybe even summoning Ron's Patronus as a distraction. Cedric is big on decoys, which if you think about for just a little bit too long becomes a little bit ironic. Ron, however, wants to try something else, and as it turns out, Charlie had an extra tip for him as well, which was try to get airborne. On the ground, a dragon's neck can pivot any way they want, but once in the air, they're pretty stuck on their single line of flight. Cedric has a thoughtful expression before looking at Ron with excitement. I have an idea. And with that, the first task is finally upon the champions, who each draw their dragons. Ron pulls the Swedish short snout, Fleur the Welsh green, Crumb the Chinese fireball, and Harry the Hungarian horntail. Ron has to go first and steps out into the arena. He spots Cedric in the crowd, who gives him a nod of support. The dragon emerges, and Ron raises his wand, summoning his broomstick into action. Immediately in flight, he's dodging blast after blast by the dragon, trying to position it as far as possible from the golden eggs. Then one last duck, as he can feel the heat blaze just above him, he hovers in place, looking the dragon directly in the eyes and begins to spin, faster and faster until he's just a blur. The dragon rears back, and the massive force generated by Ron's incredible demonstration of the hurricane halt deflects the inferno right back at the dragon, which is temporarily stunned by the turn of events. Ron pulls out of the spin, and now with the world itself shifting around him, points the end of his broomstick right at the egg and catapults towards the ground. In a rush, he's thrown from the broomstick and gathers the egg, but in the time it takes for him to step away, another blast from the short snout narrowly misses a direct hit, and Ron's robes are alight. But he's made it through the first task. Fleur and Crumb follow as per always, then finally Harry steps into the arena against the Hungarian horntail. This time armed with all of the preparation Sirius could offer. The crowd is dead silent as Harry enters, and the gigantic horntail steps forward to face him. It wastes no time and directs a massive blast of heat right where Harry was standing. He dives for a nearby boulder. Personally, I like to think it's the one that Cedric normally turns into a Labrador. Panic flows through Harry. He can't possibly win. The odds are stacked against him. The horntail's blast range and magnitude is unlike anything the other dragons could muster. But he can't go down without a fight, so with a look of determination, Harry steps free from the boulder and blasts it square in the eyes with the conjunctivitis curse, and the dragon topples backwards. Harry shoots forward and collects the egg with a flourish. The crowd erupts. And that brings us to the end of part 5.
Yes! Well done, dragon!
Harry stared up at the judges with bated breath. He'd done it. He could hardly believe it, but he'd managed to get past the dragon. Ron had scored a 39 to Crumb's 40, although Harry had noticed a large amount of booing when Karkaroff had given his score. Ron seemed to have been docked points for his crash on the broom and catching flame before exiting the arena. Harry's scores appeared: 9 from Dumbledore, 7 from Madame Maxine, 8 from Crouch, 10 from Ludo, and a 5 from Karkaroff. 39 points, tied with Ron. Karkaroff clearly doing some point fixing as usual here, but claimed Harry had copied Crumb's tactic since he also used the conjunctivitis curse. Never mind that Crumb's dragon had smashed some eggs while Harry's had not. Either way, the first task is over. The champions are now tasked with solving their golden eggs before the second task in February. Of course, before we get there though, we also have the unexpected task, the asking of dates to the Yule Ball. As ever, it comes as a huge shock to Harry, as he really doesn't exactly have any idea who he'd ask, although is certainly asked by quite a few girls. I am the chosen one. Whack. Not yet, Harry, not yet. Ron, however, seems to be really enjoying the attention he's been getting since the first task. Everyone agreed that his use of the hurricane halt was inspired, and Ron is excited about the prospect of asking someone to go to the Yule Ball with him. In fact, Ron even has new dress robes this time around. Mrs. Weasley decided that Ron deserved a reward for becoming school champion. Cedric, despite not being a champion this time around, finds out he will still end up as part of the opening ceremonies when, to his surprise, Fleur Delacour asks him to the Yule Ball, which of course he accepts. Hashtag Fledrick. Fleur? That would be Cedric and Fleur. Meanwhile, Harry, growing more desperate as the dance draws nearer, realizes his best friend Hermione might make a great date. He's not necessarily interested in the romance of it all, but thinks it might make for a fun evening. To his dismay, however, it turns out that Hermione already has a date, but is being very dodgy about saying who it is. Despite only asking Hermione as a friend, Harry can't help but feel oddly disappointed that this plan didn't work out. To his surprise, however, he is cornered one day just outside the Great Hall by none other than Cho Chang, who asks him to go to the ball. What? Cherry is back! Aw, good for them. Harry obviously says yes and finds he is actually looking forward to the dance all of a sudden. Who knew? But as usual, the unexpected task comes with unexpected twists. Harry arrives in the Great Hall to meet Cho, and they've spent some time together since she asked him, and it turns out they are able to bond quite nicely over Quidditch. But much to his shock, Ron arrives with Hermione. A pang of something Harry can't quite place erupts inside of him. His best friend is here with his brother, who has barely spoken to him all year. Does he feel betrayed by either of them? Both of them? Neither? Had Ron asked Hermione just to spite him? Did he actually like her? Or were they just here as friends as well? Even more shocking, though, is Krumm's arrival with none other than Ginny, which may seem kind of out of left field, but if you'll recall at Bill and Fleur's wedding in the main saga, Ginny is the first person he notices after asking if Hermione and Ron were together. Either way, every other girl in the school is jealous of her. Ron and Harry are not impressed and feel immediately protective over their little sister, a rare moment of unity for them, but their tirades are interrupted by the start of the dance. And you know what? Everyone, even Ron and Harry, have a stupendous time because wizard school is supposed to be fun, gosh darned it! Also, Neville, in case you are wondering, ends up going with Parvati. Hashtag Parvel? Hashtag Pat Bottom? It can't be Pat Bottom. Or can it? You know what? I'm here for it. You really don't see enough Neville Parvati ships, do ya?
That's gonna be one of the dumbest jokes we've ever heard.
I can't say it's our best. Anyway, on this side of Christmas, the looming threat of the egg becomes greater and greater as Harry has not yet solved it. But as usual, Moody is there to intervene, but has a new pathway. So normally what he does in the main story is tells Cedric, but this time he's going to tell Cedric, but he is very coy about it, instead opting to teach his 6th year students about threats underwater, which just so happen to include information about what mer people sound like. Cedric immediately figures out what the sounds are coming from the egg and tells Ron his theory, and together they crack the code and realize that Ron will need to maneuver in the lake. And all of this is exactly to Moody's plan, who wanted Cedric to tell Ron and figures he will tell Harry, which he does. Listen, Harry, open your egg underwater. There's a riddle. I haven't forgotten that you tried to tell me about the dragons, and you should have beaten me on the first task. Karkaroff was shaving points for Krumm. Are you kidding? Harry responds. That Harry game was amazing, and you'd already gotten the egg by the time you caught fire. Yeah, well, now we're even, Ron tells him, and then departs. With this extra hint, Harry is able to quickly solve the egg and consults Neville and Hermione about how on earth he's supposed to breathe underwater for an hour. And to everyone's shock, Neville immediately has the answer. Harry, I know this one! He paused to spare a look at Hermione, certain she was going to call it out first, but for the first time ever, Hermione looked to be at a complete loss. It's actually simple, gillyweed. I read about it in this book Moody gave me about water plants in the Mediterranean. It's called Magical Water Plants in the Mediterranean. The more that Harry read about gillyweed, the more perfect it sounded. The question was, where to get some? He was sure that Snape must have some in his office, but Harry hardly thought that stealing from Snape, then showing up with these stolen goods was a fun idea. Fortunately, Harry has another easier route to gillyweed this time around. Sirius, who he writes to with request and who answers swiftly, although admits he's surprised that Harry isn't trying to turn himself into an animal to complete the task.
A dolphin would have just been so cool.
A sentence I can just never imagine Sirius Black saying. Like, dolphin? As if.
As if.
At last, though, the day of the task is upon them, and Harry is feeling pretty good about his plan. Waiting for the start, Harry looks around for Cho, but can't find her in the stands. Or Hermione, for that matter. Next to him, Harry hears Ron ask Krum if he's seen Ginny anywhere, but he ignores him. The 4 champions line up, and Harry and Ron are positioned right next to each other. They exchange a look and then stare into the depths of the cold water below. The gong sounds and they're off. Ron performs a complicated-looking spell with his wand pointed at his head, and a large bubble appears and engulfs his head before he dives in. Harry looks over and is like, cool. And then shoves the gillyweed into his mouth and begins to chew. This time he's a bit more aware what will happen, but it doesn't make the experience any more enjoyable. Nonetheless, the challenge is on. And it turns out that the gillyweed is high and away the best choice, and Harry quickly catches Ron, gives him a wink, and blasts past him. Haha, loser! They're after all still brothers, so, banter. Takes some searching, but eventually down at the bottom of the lake, Harry finds what he's looking for, the things the champions will sorely miss. Hermione, Cho, Ginny, and Cedric are all floating in an entranced sleep. Harry can of course tell that he's supposed to be saving Cho, but can't stand the idea of leaving Hermione or Ginny behind either. Would they die if the others didn't show up? I guess he's also vaguely concerned about Cedric, but more so the other 3. Fortunately, Ron shows up quickly and starts to untie Hermione. He and Ron can't talk, but share an eye roll that Ginny is the thing Krum will miss the most. Ron urges Harry to untie Cho and get moving. Harry starts, but out of the corner of his eye sees a third figure appear and slam into Ron. Harry turns and sees an unbelievable sight. Victor Krum, with the head of a huge shark, has bowled Ron away from Hermione and was circling back. Ron is frantically reapplying his popped bubblehead charm and can't see Krum. Harry points his wand at Ron and shouts, "Accio!" and summons Ron to himself just in time for Krum to miss. He doubles back again, jaws open wide, and aims once again for the brothers. Ron pulls out his own wand and casts a conjunctivitis curse at Krum and hits him in the face, causing him to veer off course and grab his eyes in pain. The boys check their watch and realize time's nearly up, and Krum is clearly not going to be rescuing Ginny. Maybe time for just another quick eye roll, just for good measure. Harry pulls Ron back and convinces him they should take her too, and Ron realizes Fleur isn't coming. As per usual, she got attacked by the Grindylows, and decides they should also rescue Cedric. So Harry with Cho and Ginny in tow, and Ron with Cedric and Hermione slowly start working their way towards the surface. Harry knows his gillyweed is set to expire any moment. They can only just see the surface of the water above. They kick, and with one last burst of effort, all 6 break the surface of the water, gasping for air. It's an extraordinary showing by both Harry and Ron, who came in after the allotted hour, but having successfully saved all of the hostages and returning to the surface at the same time, earned matching marks of 40 points apiece. They tell the judges about Krum's behavior, and when questioned about it, Krum says he doesn't even remember doing it, just that it felt like after he jumped in, somebody was telling him what to do. To which Moody chimes in that his transfiguration spell probably just went wrong, likely that the shark brain took over and started giving commands. Animal transfigurations are very difficult, and sharks just want to eat. Krum is hit with big penalties for the attack and falls to 4th place in the tournament, even behind Fleur, who didn't complete the task, but still made excellent use of the bubblehead charm. Ginny, for her part, is very unimpressed with Krum's performance and is happy to tell him so while she works a beetle out of her hair. Is it just the beetle this time? No, it's not. Harry and Ron are both very pleased with themselves and find that despite the missteps of the year, they both would have been in a much worse place without the other during the second task. Great save with the summoning charm. I couldn't see anything, Ron tells Harry. Thanks, learned that one from you. Great work with that conjunctivitis curse too. That sent him reeling, Harry responds. Actually, I got that one from you, Ron says. Cho and Hermione are both very impressed with the boys. Hermione is a little embarrassed at having been the thing that Ron would miss the most, and Cho is a little jealous that Harry stayed down to get the others rather than bringing her straight back to the surface. But all is still well, and the two share their first kiss, which Harry later describes to Neville as being wet. Get it? Wet because of the water. You see, because in the other story, he describes the kiss as wet because she's crying. You The time between the second and the third task doesn't end up being that eventful. Usually, this is where Barty Crouch Sr. escapes and is eventually killed, but he's not actually being held under the Imperious Curse this time. And as a reminder, he knows that his son has escaped, but is leery of raising any bells about it because it will implicate him in his son's escape from Azkaban. Harry does spend more time with Cho during this time, and things are going well, though she's much more interested in their relationship than who put his name in the Goblet of Fire. Meanwhile, an unlikely grouping has come together to train on defensive magic for the third and final task. It's Harry, Cho, Hermione, Cedric, and Ron. The 5 best friends that anyone could have. And Neville! Not for nothing was the hero of the second task, although he is spending a lot of time with Parvati these days. I mean, hashtag Pat Bottom. It's catching on. Also, despite Moody's claims, Ron is unconvinced that Crumb simply lost control as a shark and thinks that some kind of dark magic was at work. That, combined with the fact that Harry was so determined to save Ginny in the lake, makes it clear to Ron that Harry didn't put his name in the goblet, meaning Harry really is in danger. They quickly found that the two were fairly evenly matched when it came to stunning spells and shield charms, but Harry had the edge on disarming. But at long last, just days before the third task, they were sparring and rolled out of a dodge and shouted "Expelliarmus!" at the exact same moment. Both wands shot from the owner's hands and landed neatly in the others. Cedric shot up from his chair in applause. "I think you two are ready." Harry and Ron grinned and tossed each other's wands back to the proper owners. So at last, Harry and Ron found themselves arriving at the maze for the start of the third task. Being tied in the competition, they would enter together with a head start over Fleur and Crumb. The cannon fired and the two were off, giving each other a nod before heading in opposite directions. They each encounter many of the usual obstacles. Ron, the Golden Mist, Harry, the Sphinx, Harry sidesteps a fully grown Blasted Scroot, and Ron, a massive Acromantula. And of course, by sidestep, I mean absolutely turn and ran in the other direction. You know, some things never change. Harry!
What?
Harry! At full sprint, Ron turns corners at random, which he's grateful are free of obstructions, until he finally rounds one last turn, and standing just 30 feet away is Victor Crumb. Ron grips his wand hesitantly. Was Crumb telling the truth about the shark head? Was he about to attack Ron again? Sure enough, Crumb's wand hand shot forward. Crucio! Ron reacts on instinct and barely produced a shield charm in time, but it shattered as Crumb's curse collided and forced Ron's wand from his hand, leaving him defenseless. "Are you mad?" Ron screamed into the darkness, but Crumb simply spun and fired another jinx that narrowly missed Ron's head. It collided with the hedge behind him and caught fire. Nearby, Harry overheard the commotion and started racing around corners looking for the source of Ron's shouting. He sprang onto the scene with Ron to his left and Crumb to his right. Instantly, Harry points his wand at Crumb and shouts, "Expelliarmus!" Crumb's wand goes flying, but while the wand is in the air, Crumb doesn't miss a beat and starts sprinting at Ron. Harry throws his own wand in Ron's direction and snatches Crumb's from the air in one fluid motion. Ron catches Harry's wand, and at the same moment, they both shout, "Stupefy!" and Crumb is blasted backwards and collapses in a heap. "What was that?" Ron shouted, looking at a clueless Harry for an explanation. "No clue," Harry responds, looking at Crumb in stunned disbelief. Not quite as stunned as Crumb looks, am I right? Meanwhile, behind them, the flaming hedge has burned down, and there it is, the Triwizard Cup. "Ron!" Harry quietly breathed out. Ron turned and stared silently at the cup. "Take it," Harry said. "I didn't even properly enter the tournament. The goblet chose you as the real Hogwarts champion over everyone else. I didn't enter it properly either, and I wouldn't even be here if you hadn't saved me from Crumb in the lake. You saved me too, and I wouldn't have solved the egg without your help." "Cedric told me about the egg," Ron admits. "I had no idea what to do." "He told you because he's a loyal friend. It's the same reason he put your name in. He recognized you as a true Hufflepuff, knew you'd work hard enough to win, knew you'd be loyal enough to tell me too. Go on, Ron, you've earned it. And hurry, Fleur could be anywhere." Ron stepped over the burning hedge and looked back at Harry, who gave him one last encouraging nod, reached his hand forward, and disappeared. Boom! End of part 6. I told you guys I was sorry at the beginning. Harry stared dumbstruck at the spot where Ron and the glowing Triwizard Cup had just vanished at once. Was this part of the competition? It couldn't be. The cup was gone, meaning the only person who could make it through was the first person to arrive. Harry knew deep in his gut that something was wrong. Using Crumb's wand, he shot red sparks skyward. In the meantime, Ron landed with a jolt in the dark grass of the Little Hangleton graveyard. Spinning on the spot, he looked around for where Harry had just been standing and then down at the cup still grasped tightly in his hand. A portkey, he said quietly to himself. But why? Then Ron's head spun again as he heard a muffled noise from the shadows of a nearby mausoleum.
The boy! Is it the boy?
The voice made every hair on Ron's neck stand up, and he stared in horror as a figure emerged from the shadows. There was a dark hood over his head, but there was no mistaking the long blonde hair around his neck. Lucius Malfoy was advancing towards him, wand drawn. And then he stopped, lowering his wand ever so slightly. He seemed to be considering something. Now, Ron doesn't have the full scope of the situation, but obviously he was not the intended target here, and Lucius was anticipating Harry, and now he has to make a decision. Tell Voldemort that the plan had failed, or just proceed anyway, using Ron's blood. Lucius had in fact argued many times with the Dark Lord over the course of the year about this exact point. It turns out he does not love taking care of the disgusting form of Voldemort in much the same way that Wormtail did not. Personally, I suspect it's the milking of Nagini that puts everyone off. It just honestly makes me want to throw up a little bit in my mouth, just saying it. He has urged his master to use any other wizard. Any wizard would do, and yet Voldemort has stayed true to his plan of seeking Harry Potter. Now, however, after months and months of planning, it had all failed. Harry had not shown up. Instead, it was the son of that filthy muggle-loving Arthur Weasley. Actually saying all those words in a row is much more upsetting than the whole milking Nagini thing. I got your back, Arthur!
Good lord.
But Lucius makes up his mind. He raises his wand again and thin cords tightly bind Ron to a nearby headstone and gags his mouth. Yes, my lord, we have the boy, Lucius announced into the darkness. And so he begins the process of making the potion, first dropping Voldemort, who's still wrapped in a cloak, into the cauldron, then taking the bone of Tom Riddle Sr., then slicing off his own hand. Somehow I feel like Lucius would really hate this particular part of the plan even more than Wormtail, who, to be fair, handled it with a certain amount of grace. Although, just for clarity, that is not me giving Wormtail any ounce of credit. At all. Ever.
That is me giving Wormtail credit.
That's actually an interesting question though as well, because can you imagine if that's why the potion didn't work? Because the servant didn't willingly give the flesh? Either way though, he does do it through what I like to imagine are boyish tears, and then approaches Ron with the knife and scrapes a lightning bolt across his forehead to draw the blood. To match your brother, he taunts, while Ron screams into his gag. Not that it will matter. I don't think you'll ever be seeing him again. He drops Ron's blood into the potion and it shines a violent shade of red. It begins bubbling like crazy before turning into a blinding white light, and Ron stares in horror as Lord Voldemort rises from the cauldron, reborn. But when he opens his eyes and looks around expectantly for his long-sought foe, his slitted red gaze lands not on Harry Potter, but on Ron. Voldemort stands frozen, his smile fading to a cold, sharp sneer. You dare bring me this? His voice would be a hiss, the words slithering out like venom. Red hair, hand-me-down robes, this must be a Weasley. That's what my son said too, my lord! No, I'm only kidding, he doesn't say that. You said the boy was here, Lucius. You used someone else's blood to return me. You understood why I needed Potter's blood, did you not, Lucius? Lucius stood trembling and pale. Whether from his sacrifice or fear, it isn't clear. Stammers in panic, trying to explain the mix-up, but Voldemort would take a slow step towards him, eyes narrowing. It seems, Lucius, that not only have you failed me in retrieving the one boy who truly matters, but you have also sacrificed a hand for nothing. His voice is cold and mocking, his wand lightly tracing the air as he decides whether to kill Lucius outright or make him suffer. But please, my lord, we had made it this far. You were so weak. Weak! The high-pitched voice pierced into the air. The Avada Kedavra! Lucius's body fell to the grass, motionless, eyes frozen in a look of stricken fear. Let us discover which of my followers have remained faithful all these long years, whispers Voldemort as he leaned down next to Lucius's body and rolled up the sleeve of his cloak on his severed hand, revealing the black ink of the dark mark. In seconds, there were loud cracks from all over the graveyard as Voldemort's supporters apparated into the clearing. Meanwhile, back in the maze, Harry had fallen to his knees. His scar burned so terribly, his head felt in danger of splitting in half. He had just witnessed Voldemort's return, his anger at Lucius, Lucius's death, and worst of all, Ron. He had sent Ron in his stead when Voldemort had always intended for Harry to be the one to make it to the graveyard. Krum had never attacked him of his own volition. It was a setup, a plan to ensure Harry made it to the cup first. And just then Harry heard Moody breaking his way through the thorns and hedges. "Potter!" Moody shouted into the night as he made two-eyed contact with him. "Potter! Where's Weasley?" He followed Harry's gaze toward the plinth where the trophy had stood. "You'd better come with me," Moody said, but there was a gruffness in his voice, and he took him stiffly by the arm and started guiding him through the maze. Harry could only guess that Moody's magical eye could see the correct way back to the opening as they traveled turn after turn. Finally, the pair broke into an opening, and there was a brief eruption from the audience as they believed Moody was delivering the champion to the crowd. Though as Dumbledore, Crouch, McGonagall, and Snape converged on them, the packed Quidditch pitch fell silent before murmurs of discussions broke out. "Portkey," Albus, Moody spat. "Weasley, he's missing." "Missing? What do you mean missing?" Professor McGonagall chimed in. "There's no way to tell with a portkey, is there?" responded Moody as everyone stared in disbelief. Graveyard," croaked Harry weakly. "He's been taken to a graveyard. I could see him, and Lucius Malfoy, and Voldemort. He's back." Dumbledore stared intently into Harry's eyes before taking his arm and pulling him gently away from Moody. Then, with a flick of his own wand, a small striped circus tent appeared, and Dumbledore shuffled them all inside. Back in the graveyard, Voldemort is walking amongst the circle of Death Eaters, taking inventory of who has returned. Avery, Knott, Crabbe, Goyle, McNair. Present but not named is also Yaxley and both Carrows. He explains Lucius's mistake and makes it clear that Harry Potter is their main target moving forward. Despite Lucius's mistake, though, he is back, and what's done is done. Lucius may have made a terrible failure, but he did deliver them a party favor, the adopted brother of Harry Potter and son of the muggle-loving Arthur Weasley.
"And who are you?"
"Shall we have a bit of fun with Lucius's parting gift?" he says, reveling in anticipation. With a flick of his wand, Ron is released from the bonds and falls to the ground, where Voldemort forces him to his feet and instructs him to duel. Ron is horror-stricken and not prepared for what's to come. "Crucio!" yells Voldemort, and Ron is struck with the full force of the curse. Back in the tent, Harry's scar burns again, and he's visited by another vision of Ron in the graveyard, this time being tortured. "What's all this, Dumbledore?" says a blustering Fudge, who enters the tent, followed by Barty Crouch Sr. "Where's Weasley? Do we have our champion? Oh my!" "What is it, Potter?" says McGonagall, swooping down on him. "He's torturing him. Voldemort's using the Cruciatus curse on Ron," Harry stammers through gritted teeth. His own skin seemed to be vibrating. "What? He who must not be named?" exclaims Fudge. "What's he going on about, Dumbledore?" "Harry was just telling us about what happened in the maze, Cornelius. Apparently he and Mr. Weasley were attacked by Victor Krum. Harry believes he was under possibly the Imperius curse. He and Mr. Weasley were able to overpower Krum and make their way to the Triwizard Cup, which turned out to be a portkey." "Krum? Imperius? But who would?" sputtered Fudge. "Someone was trying to get me to the cup first. Whoever put my name in the goblet. I think that's why Krum attacked us in the lake and again in the maze tonight. Voldemort was furious with Lucius that I wasn't the first to touch the cup. I keep seeing into his mind. Lucius, he's dead." "Malfoy? Dead? He who must not be named restored? Surely this is nonsense." "Ah!" Harry fell to his knees as his scar burned again. "Imperio!" Voldemort shouted at Ron, who found himself immediately under the spell's influence. Voldemort's voice was speaking to him. "Bow!" it commanded him. He felt his back arch, but no! It was Harry's voice. "Let him go! Ron, you have to fight it!" So basically what's happening here is Harry is seeing it through into Voldemort's mind, which is currently controlling Ron due to their connection. And Harry is actually sending his own message through Voldemort, which is traveling through Voldemort's Imperius curse into Ron's mind. Upon hearing Harry's voice, Ron lifted his head of his own volition and met Voldemort's red eyes, which looked furious. Gripping the Holly Wand and with Harry's voice ringing in his ears, he thought briefly of their training before the third task, and on instinct lifted Harry's wand and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" Voldemort at the same moment fired back with Avada Kedavra! The forces of the spells collided. Priori Incantatem had been invoked. A beam of light connected Voldemort's wand to Harry's, and Ron saw the bead of light being forced back and forth between the two. The golden dome appears around them as Ron's ears are filled with Phoenix song, and then something else. It was Harry's voice again. "Don't let that bead touch the wand, Ron." It took all the focus he possessed, but slowly, the bead started moving towards Voldemort's wand, and finally, it connected. Ron heard his own screams fill the air, and then the ghostly form of Lucius Malfoy emerged from the point where the wands connected. It looked savagely down on Voldemort, who stared up, his eyes wide in fear. Malfoy turned to Ron. "The cup will take you back. Bring my body with you." Malfoy was followed by an old man Ron had never seen before, and then Harry's parents, James and Lily Potter. "Thank you, Ron. You've given Harry a family." Ron spared a momentary glance to look into the eyes of Lily and James. They looked so kind, so warm. "We can give you just a few seconds head start. Break the connection. Now!" Ron wrenched Harry's wand upwards and made a sprint for it. He dove on top of Malfoy's body and pointed the holly wand at the cup. "Accio!" he shouted and grabbed it. He was gone. "Dumbledore, this boy is clearly speaking madness, losing his mind. Surely you don't." But there was a loud thump just outside the tent as Ron reappeared with the dead body of Lucius Malfoy. Loud cheers filled the arena once again as the crowd interpreted Ron's return as his victory in the tournament, but those cheers quickly turned to screams as they realized he was holding a dead body.
This is my father.
Fudge stood stunned in disbelief that Harry's words all seemed to be true. Lucius was dead. Ron returned, clutching the cup, and worst of all, had a lightning bolt slashed across his forehead. "How did you get away, Mr. Weasley?" Dumbledore asked in a calm and comforting tone. But before Ron could answer, there came a sputtering noise from just inside of the tent that drew everyone's attention back inside. There sat Moody, frantically searching for something deep in his pockets. He located his hip flask and took a desperate sip, but nothing came out. And without warning, his face seemed to start to melt. "Stupefy!" It was Barty Crouch Sr. who watched in horror as the shape of his stunned son appeared on the ground in front of him. The next few hours were a complete blur for Harry. The crowd at the third task had turned into a complete panic, the worst of which was Draco emerging from the stands and collapsing at his father's side, vowing to get revenge on Ron.
This is my father.
Ron had explained everything that had happened in the graveyard after the Portkey took him, which matched everything Harry had seen. Barty Crouch Jr. was questioned under Veritaserum with Fudge present and explained the entire plan, how he'd escaped his father's home last spring, put Harry's name in the goblet, put Crumb under the Imperius Curse twice. And this go round, the evidence is simply too overwhelming. Fudge cannot deny the return of Voldemort, and therefore must take his return seriously. Which cracks the door for a multitude of enormous questions. What does this mean for the Order of the Phoenix? Where does Umbridge show up, if at all? How will Draco's allegiance be played out after his father's death? And will the prophecy still be at stake? Okay, so Ron's return from the graveyard with Lucius Malfoy's body and all the information that corroborates everything Harry has been telling Dumbledore, Fudge, McGonagall, Snape, and Barty Crouch Sr. is enormous because it means that Fudge and the Ministry cannot ignore the validity of Harry's claims. This could never be more vital because of the massive toll it is going to take on Voldemort's plan, which I'd love to outline for you with some good old-fashioned Death Eater math. That's math and not mask. And yes, we did pay the math budget, which may have been in vain because Death Eaters are not numbers, but I digress. They just could have told me that before I checked out, you know? Use that math budget somewhere else. Let me just say though that even if they aren't numbers, they also certainly don't have them. Now, to be fair, Voldemort's regime under normal circumstances isn't absolutely massive. At the time of his return, his entire envoy totals to 25 key followers. One of them is Snape, who is a double agent. Karkaroff will ultimately flee. Draco will become one of them and never truly participates. And Barty Crouch Jr. immediately has the Dementor's Kiss administered and is not really providing anyone, anywhere, any utility, even at all. "I'll show you mine if you show me yours."
Where is that?
That's when he does the... Oh gosh, they're gonna clip that. Gotta remember I'm on camera.
"I'll show you mine if you show me yours."
That means 21 key followers, 10 of whom are currently in Azkaban prison, which is important to point out because in this version of the narrative, Fudge will actively take Dumbledore's advice and swap out the Dementors with Aurors, which will make security far more ironclad. That brings Voldemort down to 11 followers he can actually count on, but it's even less than that because that's just the number in the main story. Don't forget that this time around, Peter Pettigrew was caught rather than reuniting with Voldemort, meaning he's in Azkaban too, and that Voldemort made the now obviously costly mistake of killing Lucius Malfoy, bringing his available numbers to 9 on the night of his rebirth. But it gets even worse, because as Voldemort was welcoming everyone back, he made the mistake of naming out loud a big portion of them.
Crab, McNair, Doyle.
Which usually Harry, but in this case Ron, is able to just repeat to the Ministry. "McNair," Harry continued, "also cleared, now working for the Ministry. Avery, Nott, Crabbe, Goyle, you are merely repeating the names of those who were acquitted of being Death Eaters 13 years ago." I feel like my voice just slowly turned into the principal from the Goofy movie. "Science? Slumber parties!" Anybody get that reference?
How about science slumber parties?
That's Fudge normally dismissing all of this information, but again, this time he won't. This time they can pretty swiftly round up these names, trusting the intel from Ron that they are Death Eaters, meaning 5 more of Voldemort's supporters are about to disappear, leaving him with just, if my count is correct, 4 Death Eaters. The Caro siblings, Amicus and Electo, Corbin, Yaxley, and Selwyn. And Snape, who, as mentioned, is a mole, and maybe Draco, who presently blames Ron for his father's death, but let's face it, it's clearly Voldemort's fault. Doubt that will come up later. It's gonna come up later. Not to mention, with the Dementors cleared from Azkaban and terror not being rained upon the wizarding world, they are not able to amass their typical numbers. Dumbledore also suggests to Fudge that he send envoys to the Giants to gain their support, which Hagrid and Madame Maxime typically have to do on their own and in secret. This time, not only does it not have to be a secret, but the Ministry can help them. They have better gifts to send, they can make more significant promises, and even provide extra numbers and security so that the 4 remaining Death Eaters aren't an issue. Let's be real, what were they gonna do anyway? So, if you're keeping track, Voldemort has way fewer numbers, no Giants, no Dementors, he still can't physically touch Harry, and doesn't actually know about the twin cores because he doesn't know that Ron was wielding Harry's wand in their duel, so he isn't attempting to seek out the Elder Wand. At least for now. So, what is Voldemort doing? And it's a great question, because usually his first plan is to try and secure the prophecy, which he's only heard half of, hoping it will give him the edge or an answer to how Harry defeated him in the first place. Even more bad news for Voldemort on this front, because usually Voldemort successfully gets a solid 12 Death Eaters into the Department of Mysteries and still fails to get it. This time, again, he only has 4 Death Eaters, and Dumbledore can just inform the Ministry that Voldemort will be trying to get it, and therefore they need to seriously improve security and make that a priority. And Voldemort can barely get inside when just the Order is secretly guarding it under the Ministry's noses. This time, they are actively protecting it. He cannot get it. That said, not a huge blow anyway, because even in the main story, he never gets it, so that doesn't change that much other than that he won't spend a whole year fruitlessly trying to get it. Even with all of that out of the way, it's not that Voldemort doesn't still have some very key defenses in place, namely his Horcruxes. At this point, Dumbledore would still be tipped off to their existence thanks to the diary in the Chamber of Secrets. Dumbledore will also have been able to use this information to learn that a piece of Voldemort lives inside of Harry as well. There's a reason Harry can talk to snakes. There's a reason he can see into Lord Voldemort's mind. And now typically one huge challenge that takes most of Half-Blood Prince to sort out is just how many Horcruxes Voldemort has actually made beyond the 2 he's already sure of that exist. This information comes from Slughorn, who had learned during Tom Riddle's time at school that 7 would be the most powerfully magical number.
Can you only split the soul once? For instance, isn't 7?
7?
Information that Slughorn is typically super reluctant to reveal because of personal shame, and he values his own safety and fears the Death Eaters will come after him if they discover he's turned it over.
Merlin's beard! No need to disfigure me, Albus.
Once again, Voldemort is at a loss here, because without such a threatening power position and the Ministry backing Dumbledore, Slughorn can feel a lot safer about his position and just willingly give the information to Dumbledore. So rather than being the one who gave Voldemort the key to victory, he can be the one who gave Dumbledore the key to victory. Or, well, I guess kind of both, but you know what I mean. The real question is, what can Voldemort do? Because even his initial plan of taking Harry's blood into his body doesn't work out, meaning he can't touch Harry, like not just physically, but like magically either. The protection is still in place. And yet, Harry is still his main threat, but getting hands on him a second time is going to be difficult. So is there another way around that protection? Possibly. What if the answer is just more power? The most power? The Elder Wand. He usually turns to this option to overcome the twin cores, but this time he will be leaning on sheer power alone to overcome Lily's protection. Meanwhile, his other usual plan is to try and kill Dumbledore, something I'm sure he's still eager to do, but as ever, a tall order. One that perhaps requires a short man. So let's get back to Harry and Ron. How does the fight against Voldemort go for them in their 5th year? Well, Dumbledore is of course very impressed with Ron's bravery in the graveyard. He usually tells Harry, "You have shown bravery beyond anything I could have expected of you tonight, Harry. You have shown bravery equal to those who have died fighting Voldemort at the height of his powers." He tells Ron the same thing, adding that he wonders sometimes if they sort too early. Either way, the fact that Voldemort took Ron's blood into himself seems in Dumbledore's eyes to include Ron a lot more in the conversation that is usually just reserved for Harry. Harry is of course obviously still the chosen one.
I am the chosen one.
And subject of the prophecy, but Ron is now clearly tied to Voldemort's fate, and so when it comes to hunting Horcruxes, which starts happening a lot faster, both boys are going to be included. And so as their 5th year begins, there are some clear differences. For one, the defense against the dark arts position. Since we don't have to worry about the ministry this go round, we also don't have to worry about Umbridge. Yay!
Asked me to remind you.
But it also brings up an interesting question of what she would be up to this year. Usually she's just the absolute worst, but it's all in the name of supporting Fudge, whose own agenda is against Dumbledore. This time though, Fudge just is aligned with Dumbledore, so is Umbridge as well? Makes me a little dry heave just thinking about it. You might think that this is pretty bad news for Voldemort, since Umbridge, despite being totally evil, is very effective at her job, and if she's aimed a different way, then well, super. But don't forget that she still works at the Ministry after year 5 when the Ministry is openly against Voldemort, and we never hear from her, and it's not until the Ministry has basically fallen and is being run by Voldemort that she ramps up production again. While she can be hyper-effective, this is usually only when the Ministry aligns with her own very self-centered, power-hungry, pure-blood beliefs. She is still a bad person under it all, and therefore I think just a regular Ministry employee for the most part. Maybe a little disgruntled?
I will have order!
To which I have no empathy. At all. But so the bigger question is, who teaches defense against the dark arts? And you guessed it, the still living Sirius Black. Don't forget, his name is totally cleared this time, and we know for sure that he's a really great wizard in this regard.
Nice one, James!
Plus, Umbridge's absence also means that Harry won't need to form the DA this time around, but he hardly needs to. Sirius's classes are very similar to DA meetings anyway, and it turns out he's an epic teacher. Really, the school year itself is a lot less important than the hunt for the Horcruxes, which I think start, as always, with the Gaunt Shack and the Ring. Dumbledore, having unearthed Tom Riddle's origins, knows that this location could be essential and begins his sleuthing, and returns the ring to Hogwarts, where Ron and Harry are both summoned to witness it and hopefully its destruction. Enter! Came Dumbledore's soft voice as they wound their way past the gargoyle statue and rapped on the Griffin knocker. As the boys entered, they both said hello to Fawkes, who was perched next to Dumbledore's desk. The relationship between the two has been very solid since the night of the graveyard. Ron understands more than ever Harry's fundamental importance in the wizarding world, and now has first-hand experience with the kind of danger and threats Harry's been having to put up with. And at any rate, Ron got a bit of notoriety himself for having been the one to see Voldemort come back and having escaped him in the graveyard. I was fortunate enough to have found this, says Dumbledore, holding up the ring, in the Gaunt Shack. I'm sure you both recall the memory we visited earlier this year. You may look, but please do not touch. Both boys lean forward to examine the ring up close. I believe it to be one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and have summoned you both here to witness how to destroy such an object. Though I'm not sure too much instruction is truly needed, as Harry, you have already succeeded in destroying this one, he says, sliding Riddle's diary across his desk. Basilisk venom? Harry questioned. But Professor, how will we get it? Ah, yet again, we must thank you, Harry, for when you killed the basilisk with Gryffindor's sword, you imbibed it with basilisk venom. The sword is goblin-made, you see, and that is capable of absorbing that which makes it stronger. Professor, Ron speaks up, what is this triangle marking on the ring? It looks kind of like an eye or something. The what? Asks Dumbledore, who comes around the desk to examine the ring himself, but as he does so, he gasps, taking it in his hand. It cannot be. Dumbledore's eyes become unfocused, as if he's reliving a long-lost memory. Ron and Harry exchange a nervous glance as Dumbledore turns his back toward them, lost in thought. Ariana,
he whispers, and then, without warning, slips the ring on his finger. The effect is immediate. Dumbledore is on the floor in agonizing pain. The ring skitters off and comes to a halt, spinning on the floor of the office. Ron and Harry immediately rush to Dumbledore, whose eyes have rolled back in his head, his body was shaking, and his hand looked charred from the ring. Destroy it! Now! His last words came out forcefully, and Harry shot for the sword of Gryffindor behind his desk. Raising it up above his head, he smashed it into the ring, which erupted in a wave of black smoke that cleared to reveal the ring cracked on the stone floor before him. Harry looked at Dumbledore, thinking the destruction would bring him relief, but nothing was further from the truth. He was still trembling, and Ron looked terrified. "What do we do?" Ron shouted hopelessly, looking around the room as if there was some kind of cure that Dumbledore may have prepared just in case something like this had happened. Fawkes suddenly took flight, swooping around the room, grabbing a large brown something from a top shelf, which he quickly dropped. "Grab it!" Harry shouted, and Ron did so, revealing the sorting hat in his hand. "What do I do?" But as Ron lifted the hat, he noticed a shift in its weight. The hat let out a large belch, and as it did so, a large golden cup erupted from the tear in its brim. Ron lifted the cup and whispered quietly to himself, "A badger," but again looked confused. Fawkes swooped down again and landed upon his shoulder and lowered his face to the cup which Ron held out for him. "Ron, hurry!" Harry shouted, still at Dumbledore's side. Ron stared in amazement as several large pearly tears fell from the phoenix into the cup, and then even though just a few drops had fallen into the cup, it suddenly began to fill all the way to the brim. Suddenly, it all made sense to Ron. He took a step towards Dumbledore, ready to offer him the healing liquid, but before he could, the cup began shaking violently in his hand. A horrible scream seemed to be coming from deep within the cup, which was now fuming a terrible black smoke into the office. Bewildered, Ron stared at the cup, determined not to spill the contents as it shook even harder, and even more smoke billowed out. And then suddenly, a bright golden glow. The smoke stopped abruptly as the phoenix tears shone brightly within the cup. The liquid looked as clear as ever. There was no time to think. Dumbledore was still in agony on the floor. Ron rushed to him and handed him the cup, which Dumbledore quickly drank down. And the effect was immediate. To both boys' astonishment, Dumbledore sat up, looking much calmer than he had seconds ago. His face was regaining color rapidly. He held up his hand. While it remained blackened, he flexed his fingers as if nothing had happened at all. "Astonishing," he said, and then took a closer look at the cup and then back at Ron, who was still standing there, holding the hat. "What just happened, Professor?" Harry asked. "An old man's curiosity, and the fortune of the brave, I dare say," responded Dumbledore. "Mr. Weasley, do you know what this is?" "Hang on," said Harry, who was just now getting a good look at the cup. "Is that the cup from Hepzibah Smith? Hufflepuff's cup?" "Indeed it is, Harry," said Dumbledore, looking warmly at him. "But how?" Ron asked, quietly staring at the cup. To his surprise, it was Harry who answered. "When I faced the basilisk, Fawkes brought me the hat. Dumbledore said I was able to pull the sword out of it because I was a true Gryffindor. You must have done the same thing with the cup." "I couldn't have said it better myself," said Dumbledore, still looking impressed. "Hepzibah claimed the cup was supposed to have many powers, and I think we have just bore witness to at least one of them. Mr. Weasley, could you describe again for me what happened? I am afraid I may have missed the finer details in my, agony." Ron explained the tears, the smoke, and the glow to Dumbledore. "Well, it appears this cup is able to multiply whatever liquid is added to it. Producing an entire goblet full of phoenix tears is no mere feat. It is a highly scarce substance." "And the smoke?" asked Ron. "Well, that is the exciting part. I believe that once full of phoenix tears, the cup itself drank the tears, which then came in contact with Voldemort's soul, which was simply no match." "So that smoke, that screaming, that was..." sputtered Harry. "Yes, that I believe was Voldemort's soul being purged from the cup. The cup it seems to be a Horcrux no more. My own health is the proof. For I am certain that if Voldemort's soul resided in the cup, that drinking from it would have been as deadly as putting on the ring." Boom! Just like that. 3 Horcruxes down, 4 to go, which just as a friendly reminder is the same number of followers Voldemort currently has at his disposal. Yo, I am so excited about this particular section of the story because I have always sort of liked the idea that Phoenix Tears being powerful enough to heal Harry's basilisk wound could potentially be powerful enough to also destroy a Horcrux if only you had enough of them. So when applied to Hufflepuff's cup, which sort of goes back to the idea of like the sword of Gryffindor coming from the sorting hat, it all just sort of seemed to fall perfectly into place. What better way to use something so healing to destroy something so terrible?
So still in Dumbledore's office, Harry, Ron, and Dumbledore look at Voldemort's treasure on the desk before them. Hufflepuff's cup and the gaunt ring with its now huge crack right through the center from where Harry struck it with the sword of Gryffindor. A rather productive evening indeed, smiled Dumbledore from behind his half-moon spectacles. I think it is time, if not for your sakes, but my own, for us all to get some sleep. So the following morning, Harry ran into Ron at the front of the Great Hall before walking into breakfast. They exchanged a heartfelt grin before heading to their respective house tables. When the usual flurry of owls signified the morning post had arrived, hundreds of owls swooped down to drop letters and packages to students. Within moments, a murmur seemed to fill the Great Hall as students who received the Daily Prophet were sharing a piece of front-page news with each other. Harry leaned over and caught a glimpse of the headline. Break-in at Gringotts. According to the goblins of Gringotts, a break-in took place late last night. Although there was no visible signs of any intruders having set off any of their safeguards, nor does it appear that the vault itself had been opened. However, the vault in question belonged to a Death Eater currently being housed in Azkaban prison. Harry's head spun looking for Ron and saw him looking back at him. With a nod, the two exited the Great Hall to an abandoned corridor. Did you see? Harry, it has to be the cup. It must have been. But at that moment, Harry felt a huge surge of pain in his scar and doubled over. Voldemort was furious, as angry as Harry had ever felt. His mind was racing. Surely, if the boy had destroyed any of his Horcruxes, he, Lord Voldemort, would have known, would have felt it. He, the greatest wizard of them all. He, the most powerful. The rest were safe. The other Horcruxes must be intact. But he must know. He must be sure. He paced the room, kicking aside the goblins' corpses as he passed, and the pictures blurred and burned in his boiling brain. The lake, the shack, and Hogwarts. In a cold sweat, Harry's eyes flew open. He stumbled to his knees on the cold castle floor. He knows. He knows we're hunting Horcruxes. A lake, the shack, and Hogwarts. Ron finished. Bewildered, Harry turned his head to see Ron was working to get back on his feet as well, a pale expression across his face. You saw it too, Harry said, staring at Ron in disbelief. Ron just nodded, though his hands were pressed hard against his eyes, as though hoping he could shake the visions from his memory. Your blood, said Harry. I wonder if when he took it. Just then, Colin Creevey appeared around the corner and gave a little whoop as he spotted Harry and Ron, who both turned away, hoping not to be seen. Harry! Hey! Harry! Called Colin excitedly. Harry turned away, wanting nothing more than just a moment to think. I've got a note for you, Harry! And Harry spun on the spot as Colin practically skipped with joy towards him, holding a tightly rolled note. Harry thanked Colin and watched him as he did a heel click and turned a corner out of sight. That kid's going to get himself killed one of these days, said Ron, staring off into the distance where Colin had just fled. What's it say? It's Dumbledore. He's seen the paper. Needs us in his office right away. And, without a moment's hesitation, the two boys sped off toward the gargoyle that guarded the entrance to the headmaster's office. Enter! Came the calm voice of Dumbledore, who greeted the boys as they entered the office. They could see the open copy of the Daily Prophet on his desk. I assume you have seen that we've been caught, said Dumbledore, with a small note of triumph in his voice. Yes, we have. But Ron, too, saw something else. Dumbledore listened calmly as the boys told him about the shack, lake, and Hogwarts Castle itself. And after a long pause, Dumbledore finally spoke. And you both witnessed this vision? Asked Dumbledore calmly. Well, it says calmly, but he kicked both of their chairs across the room and, threw all of his silver instruments on the ground, and an inferno of fire emitted out of his ears. Well, none of that happened. The boys nodded, and Dumbledore's genial tone seemed to lessen. Very well. If this break-in has tipped Voldemort off to Hufflepuff's cup being removed from a Gringotts vault, and we know why he witnessed the shack, we can only assume the other locations are further hiding spots for additional Horcruxes. Do you know where the lake is then? Ron asked, speaking up for the first time. Dumbledore's piercing blue eyes paused on Ron again. I'm sure you will recall my conversation with Mrs. Cole from the orphanage. The boys nodded. She alluded to a location where the orphanage would take the children on holiday. I located the cave some time ago, but have not fully investigated it. But now it seems as though Voldemort has done the job for us. I was afraid that something like this might happen when I read the paper this morning. Gather your things, boys. We'll need to act fast. Now, said Harry, surprised at Dumbledore's haste. I think so, replied Dumbledore. If I am not mistaken, you saw those locations because Voldemort is worried about the safety of his Horcruxes, something I'm certain he never would have believed he would need to do. I suspect he is already on his way to ensure the others remain untampered with. So, he doesn't know when we've destroyed one? Ron asked. Doesn't seem so. It wasn't until the news of the supposed break-in at Gringotts that he became worried, And it's been 12 hours since the two of you destroyed 2 of them. There was a faintest twitch in Dumbledore's mustache as he gestured to the cup and the ring. If, however, he redoubles the protection around the remaining objects, I fear we will never reach them. If one is indeed at Hogwarts, I think we can assume it is safe enough. Voldemort cannot hope to penetrate the castle with so few followers. Therefore, we must procure the Horcrux from the cave as soon as possible. 10 minutes later, the boys returned to the office, ready to go. Harry had his invisibility cloak, and to their surprise, Dumbledore handed each of them the relics of their houses. Just in case, he added, with a wink. From there, the trio headed to Hogsmeade, where they could apparate to the cave, and we kind of know the drill from here. Dumbledore inspects the entrance, cuts his own hand to open the door, and navigates towards the chain in the water where he pulls up the boat. Now, normally Dumbledore says the boat can only carry 1 person, but won't register Harry's power in comparison to his own. And not for nothing, but if that's the case, I doubt adding Ron to the equation will make a difference either, so they all sail across, taking terrible note of the Inferi below the surface. As they reach the island in the lake, both boys grasp their foreheads in terrible pain. What has happened? Dumbledore asks in alarm. He's angry, Harry replies through gritted teeth. Really angry, Ron confirms. Dumbledore stands at once and makes his way to the basin, which as ever is full of the drink of despair, and Dumbledore tries everything he can think of to rid the basin of the potion before concluding that he will need to drink it. He conjures a goblet out of thin air and fills it to the brim. As the boys recover and make their way to the center, he instructs them that they will need to ensure he finishes the entire basin, and without warning, drains the goblet. Harry and Ron stare in disbelief that Dumbledore has acted so quickly, and then suddenly keels over in terrible pain. No! Dumbledore screams out in agony. Harry recovers first. He must have expected something like this. He told us he had to drink it all. Come on, he says, rushing to fill the goblet a second time. Before he does, though, Ron stops him and has an idea. Use this, he says, producing Hufflepuff's cup. Harry considers him for a moment and then smiles. No. You better do it, he says, letting Ron through, who fills the cup up to the brim. The cup becomes warm in Ron's hand before a bright white light flashes out of the cup, leaving a formerly green potion, a non-threatening clear, which Ron swiftly hands to Dumbledore and tips it down his throat. The effect is almost immediate. Water, he explains, admiring the cup. Excellent work, Mr. Weasley. I dare say this potion is no health drink. And so the process continues over and over until the basin is drained, and at the bottom a large locket appears and Harry reaches in to grab. But as he does so, the surface of the lake suddenly begins to bubble and erupt all around them. Harry, Ron, behind me, now! In the back of his head, Harry realized something was wrong, not just because the Inferi were emerging, but because it didn't make sense. Voldemort wouldn't have intended himself to be attacked just for collecting the locket. Dumbledore! Said a high, cold voice from above them. Harry and Ron looked up in horror as floating down out of the darkness was none other than Voldemort himself, only visible by the faint reflection of his pale skin amidst billowing black robes. He landed softly across the basin from Harry, Ron, and Dumbledore, looking livid, and as he did so, slimy gray arms and heads began surfacing all around the island, clawing their way onto land. Dumbledore wasted no time. Swirling on the spot with his wand raised above his head, he summoned a wall of fire that encircled the entire island, and Harry saw at once the Inferi spilled back into the water, although more arms still tried to claw their way through, recoiling at the flames. As Dumbledore's turn finished, he pointed his wand behind him at the boys, who were sent reeling back into the boat. Get out of here! He commanded. Both boys made to refuse and tried to clamber back to shore, but it was no good. The boat was speeding away through the turbulent water. I see you've done your homework, Dumbledore. I should have known. Well, much like yourself, I was quite the gifted student, Tom. Voldemort sneered at him. No matter, Dumbledore. A piece of my soul is a small price to pay for your life. Avada Kedavra! But Dumbledore was ready. The stone basin flew from its position to intercept the spell and shattered into rubble. Dumbledore had been waiting for it and sent the rubble flying at Voldemort, who was now on the defensive. He reacted just soon enough, and the rocks transformed into a fine dust just before reaching him. But in the moment he needed to react, Dumbledore had launched another attack, and from behind him a huge wave of water engulfed Voldemort and trapped him inside of a large floating sphere. Several Inferi had also been carried in the wave as well and were now struggling inside of the orb alongside Voldemort. Impedimenta! Harry yelled as another body attempted to hoist itself into the boat. He and Ron had thus far been able to force off each new attacker with a variety of spells from their Triwizard Cup training. And with a soft crash, the boat collided with the opposite shore, and both boys leaped out, staring back at the infernos still circling the island in the middle of the lake. They could see a huge orb of water and hoped Dumbledore had conjured it. As they watched, the orb floated out over the swirling lake. "Run!" shouted Ron, his wand held aloft and lighting the way forward. As the boys rushed towards the exit, however, they encountered a new problem. Now that they were on shore, the Inferi were exiting the water in much larger numbers ahead of them. A slimy arm reached out and grabbed Ron's wand arm. There was a slashing sound as Harry raced forward with the sword of Gryffindor and sliced clean through the Inferi's arm. "Light the way," he told Ron as he dashed forward and sliced another body clean in half. Ron chased after him, wand held high, illuminating the way ahead. Meanwhile, on the island, Dumbledore was forcing the orb of water over the lake. He was on the precipice of lowering it beneath the surface when a hand grasped around his ankle. The wave that he'd used to conjure the orb had doused a small portion of the protective flames, and a small stream of Inferi had clawed their way onto the island. With his focus broken, the orb exploded in every direction, and Voldemort fell towards the surface of the lake. He thrust his wand downward, and the water parted around him as he fell, so he landed on the damp, rocky bottom of the lake. In an instant, he shot forth, arcing high over the ring of flames. The scene seemed to slow down. Several Inferi had managed to grab hold of Dumbledore now, who looked up into the red eyes of Voldemort, who thrust his wand forward, and a flash of emerald green illuminated the scene. In just an instant, the flames disappeared, and the cavern fell into blackness. It could mean only one thing. Harry and Ron could both hear the cold laughter fill the cavern, and both bleeding from fighting off the Inferi, scrambled through the cave entrance, which had already opened as they fell towards it. The sea breeze hit them like a wall for only an instant before they grabbed hands and disapparated from the spot, landing in a heap at the center of Hogsmeade just a moment later. They could still hear the cold laughing, unsure if it was in their minds or echoing in their ears. The next few days were a blur as a familiar scene unfolded once the news spread about Dumbledore's death. Witches and wizards poured in from all over for the funeral. Harry and Ron vaguely wondered to themselves how the funeral may unfold without a body to bury. They knew the final Horcrux still remained at the school, but they had not been able to muster the energy to look for it, having no idea where to begin. It seemed, however, not to matter, for the time being at least, as even Voldemort wasn't foolish enough to attack the school while so many witches and wizards from around the world were pouring in to attend Dumbledore's funeral. As for the locket, they had quickly tried to destroy it with the sword when they'd arrived back at Hogwarts, certain Voldemort was sure to be on their heels at any moment. But Voldemort had not pursued them, and to their dismay, the sword had failed to destroy the Horcrux because, indeed, the locket was not a Horcrux at all. Harry knew it was no good the moment the sword had made contact. Unlike the cup or the ring, there was no smoke, no scream of agony from the thing inside. Instead, it merely hissed where the basilisk venom had touched it and cracked open, revealing a folded up note. And of course, it's the note that we all know too well. The note signed with the initials R.A.B. After considering the matter, they reasoned out that whoever R.A.B. was, he must have been very close to Voldemort to discover his secret. Must have been a Death Eater. "We could ask Snape," Ron suggested with no real conviction. Harry didn't like the idea of sharing such a big secret with Snape, even if he likely could tell them if there was a Death Eater named R.A.B. Ron's suggestion gave Harry a new idea. Someone he could trust. Someone whose family had also had ties to the Death Eaters. And with that, Sirius looked up from the note and smiled. The days following Dumbledore's death were some of the most tense Harry had ever experienced. He was positive that Voldemort would try to attack or infiltrate the castle to try and remove or double the protections on his Horcrux, whatever it was. And without Dumbledore's own protections in place, Harry was certain he would be able to break through, even though the teachers had been busy casting as many protective enchantments as they could. "Maybe he thinks it's hidden so well he doesn't even need to bother," suggested Ron, who too had been curious about Voldemort's lack of action. This thought had crossed Harry's mind as well. Was it possible that Voldemort had discovered a hiding place in the school so secret that no other student had come across it since he left the school himself? It felt impossible, and yet Harry reminded himself that Voldemort had successfully located the centuries-lost Chamber of Secrets and used another Horcrux to lead people to it. What if this final Horcrux was also located in such a remote section of the castle there weren't even legends of it? And yet, No, every now and then Harry would feel faint pangs of fear or anger that were not his own, and was convinced this was Voldemort fearing them finding that final Horcrux. Important to point out that Ron of course felt these pains as well, but was less adept at interpreting Voldemort's emotions. So why doesn't Voldemort attack the castle right away? Well, there's really two main reasons. Even without Dumbledore there, the castle is heavily protected. And don't forget that Voldemort doesn't really have an army to speak of this time. He's got like 4 Death Eaters. Plus, arrogant as he is, and despite Dumbledore having found the cave, he believes his Hogwarts Horcrux very safe, as it's been right under Dumbledore's nose for years and never been discovered. But his real cause for delay lies back with Lucius Malfoy's folly back in the graveyard when he took Ron's blood instead of Harry's. Usually this is Voldemort's way around Lily's sacrifice, sort of. After doing so, he can physically touch Harry and cast spells at him without them rebounding upon himself.
Dear sweet Lily Potter gave her life for her only son. She provided the ultimate protection.
Of course, that's actually a hollow victory, though, as Voldemort took the protection into himself and then just acts as the, love crux for Harry, but whatever. The point is that Voldemort rightly believes the protection is still in place, so he avoids attacking the castle because he might meet Harry, who has invincible protection against him.
I could not touch him.
And unable to procure his blood, he is seeking a new solution to this problem in the form of just sheer raw power. Which is why today's episode is brought to you by Monster Energy Drink, the chosen energy drink of the Dark Lord. No, I'm just kidding. Raw power in the form of a legendary wand that must always win duels for its master. It would appear a visit to Grigorovich is in order. And you know what? If there's time, maybe a 7-Eleven on the way. Meanwhile, despite the hunt for the Hogwarts Horcrux going poorly, there hasn't been nothing to celebrate on Harry and Ron's end of things. Because after Sirius saw the note in the locket, he instantly recognized the handwriting and initials as his brother's. Regulus. Sirius doubted that something as important as that would just be lying around, but suggested that they at least start at his childhood home to see if they could find any clues. And number 12 Grimmauld Place is something of a shock to Harry, who had spent the last year living with his godfather in a much more secluded and humble home. The inside of the Black residence was infested with a large number of magical vermin, and they were loudly greeted by a screaming portrait Sirius informed them was his mother. After sidestepping a large brown patch in the entryway that seemed to be breathing, Sirius showed them to Regulus's old room, scowling the whole way. His room was covered in the green hangings of Slytherin House. A large black family crest was positioned over his bed. A moving photo of a house Quidditch team in old robes sat on his nightstand, and a large poster of a blonde wizard Harry had never seen hung on the wall. Beneath the poster read the heading, Für das große Wahl. Well, let's start looking around, said Sirius. Careful opening any drawers in case anything jumps out at you. The next 10 minutes were spent upending everything in the room, looking for any hint about the location of the Horcrux. Harry had just finished inspecting a small wooden box that ended up being full of rotten flobberworms when he heard Ron shout. Pretty sure it's supposed to be work cap powder inside of there that makes your hand look like some type of weird glove type situation. But you know what? I got that question wrong on J versus Ben, so whatever. Harry, come look at this, Ron shouted. He just emptied a drawer from Regulus's desk and was holding up. The locket! Exclaimed Harry, spotting the large emerald S emblazoned upon it. Then a creak at the door made all 3 of them jump. Harry turned to see the dirtiest house elf he'd ever laid eyes on, stumbling into the room, evidently unpleased to see them. Creature! Barked Sirius. For several minutes, the house elf creature scolded Sirius, lamenting the damage done to the house and vehemently declaring him a disgrace to the Black family. Eventually, Sirius shouted at Creature to get out. And apparently still bound by the house elf's enslavement to the House of Black, he apparated on the spot and left the room. I never thought I'd see that pathetic old wart plaster again, said Sirius. Come on, boys, let's head back to school. So the trio returns to school and brings the locket to Dumbledore's office, where the Sword of Gryffindor is still lying on the desk. And you might be wondering if they need to open the locket to destroy it, and I think the answer is actually no. It times out nicely in the books that they believe they need to open it to destroy it, but then figure out how to do it exactly when they get the sword, so it's all very exciting. But if they just had the sword to begin with, certainly they would have tried, and I see no reason why it wouldn't have worked. So, Harry offers the sword to Sirius, since it had been his brother who had recovered the locket, and allows him the honor of destroying the Horcrux. Which, let me just interject to say that I love for 2 reasons. The first of which is that they physically handle the locket in book 5, then just toss it, and then have to re-find it again, which is just a nightmare to imagine. And 2, it's just kind of fun that Sirius gets to finish Regulus's work and know that in the end his brother actually ended up being good. Something Sirius never gets to learn in the main series. Ever. But with the locket out of the way, the hunt for the Hogwarts Horcrux resumes with little to go on other than maybe it has something to do with Ravenclaw? Meanwhile, Voldemort has successfully tracked down Grigorovich and extracted the memory about the thief, wondering where he is now when he is summoned most surreptitiously to Malfoy Manor by his latest recruit, Draco Malfoy. Draco has interesting news for Voldemort, reported to him by the surprise arrival of a manky old house elf named Kreacher that informed him Harry Potter, Sirius Black, and some red-haired git in hand-me-down robes were searching the Black family home and had located a large locket that Kreacher recognized as one of the Dark Lord's possessions, having been the one to test its defenses. And I know what you're thinking here. Regulus wanted Kreacher to destroy the locket, and his greatest failure is not destroying it.
Before Master Regulus died, he ordered Kreacher to destroy it, but no matter how hard Kreacher tried, he could not do it.
So why would he try to give it back? But the thing you have to remember is that Kreacher doesn't really understand the full scope of the instructions, and Regulus dies pretty much as he is giving these instructions. Kreacher may as well have believed that the destruction of the locket was what Voldemort himself may have wanted. But at the description of the locket, Voldemort loses control and lashes out in anger, killing Kreacher on the spot, but he immediately regains his composure. Very good, Draco. You have done well to tell me this, and your obedience shall be rewarded. You are much smarter than your father, who thought he could disobey my orders, but I dealt with him. And with that, he vanishes to inspect Grimmauld Place for himself to try and confirm the location of the locket. He upends the entire house in Regulus's room, seething in anger, forced to accept that the locket is gone. He lets out a terrible scream of rage that far away sends Harry and Ron to their knees in pain. But then, as he stands in the wrecked room, his eyes read the words, "Für das große Wohl," and a maniacal laughter overtakes him as he lays eyes on the blonde wizard in the poster. Back at Hogwarts, though, Harry and Ron recover from a visit into Voldemort's mind where they witnessed him inside of Regulus's room. They make eye contact. "He knows about the locket," Ron says. "It must have been Kreacher when Sirius told him to get out. He could have gone to the Malfoys. His mom's related to Sirius. She could have..." But Harry stopped mid-thought. The vision of Kreacher and Narcissa Malfoy fixed in his brain made him realize something. "Dobby!" Harry called into the empty room, and crack! The house elf appeared, bowing low. Harry quickly explained, making sure to leave out certain details, that he needed help finding a room at Hogwarts that nobody would know about, not even the teachers. And to his great surprise, Dobby merely smiled. "Dobby knows of a room, sir. It's called the Come and Go Room, or the Room of Requirements. We hides things there. The room is not always there, but it is always equipped for a seeker's needs." This was beyond what Harry could have hoped for. If Voldemort needed a place to hide his Horcrux, a secret vanishing room whose insides changed to fit the needs of the Seeker sounded like just the place. "Show us, Dobby." And so several minutes later, they were standing before the bare stretch of wall with Dobby explaining how to get in. This was it. Harry could feel it. He immediately began pacing, thinking hard that he needed to find the place Voldemort hid something. But nothing happened. The wall remained solid. "What happened, Dobby? Why didn't it work?" "I don't know, Harry Potter, sir. I asked it to show me the room where Voldemort hid something." "Hang on," said Ron. "Maybe we can't ask it to show what he asked for. We just have to ask it the same thing, so just a room to hide stuff." And sure enough, it worked. 3 more times past the wall and a door had materialized, inside of which was a breathtaking sight. A room the size of a cathedral, filled with mountains and rows of discarded and hidden things from generations of students. "We don't even know what we're looking for," said Ron with dawning comprehension of the new problem. "Or if it's even in here." "It's here," said Harry confidently. "I know this is right." But he also knew that him and Ron would never be able to search the entire room, especially with no idea what they were looking for. And he had a bad feeling that time was running out. That burst of happiness from Voldemort felt very foreboding. Just in case you haven't put those pieces together yet, the burst of happiness that Voldemort felt was the recognition of Grindelwald on the wall. That German phrase I keep attempting to say is "for the greater good," and he would have seen that same person, Grindelwald, inside of the memory of Grigorovich, stealing it from him. "You stay and keep searching. Anything with an eagle or a lion on it. I'm going to get help." And Harry left Ron to search. 15 minutes later, he had returned with Cho, Hermione, and Neville, having explained to Cho, who, don't forget, he's actually dating this go-round, and has asked her about if there are any Ravenclaw artifacts, and learned about the diadem. However, he doesn't explain any of the Horcrux information, but now at least they have more eyes and hands and some direction. As he re-entered the room, though, another burst of happiness overtook him from Voldemort, and his mind was filled with the haunting image of Dumbledore's body dead on an island in a cave, and Voldemort grabbing his wand. What was that? Why'd he take his wand? Asked Ron. Dunno, said Harry. Let's start looking. The extra help is useful, and in no time at all, Harry hears Cho call out that she's found something, and sure enough, she's holding up the silver tiara with the large sapphire stone and eagle engraving. Amazing, shouts Harry. Now quick, we have to destroy it. Destroy it? Questions Cho. But couldn't we use it? No, don't put it on. I'll explain later. It's all to do with defeating Voldemort. Now come on. But then Harry and Ron fall to their knees again as another vision overtakes them. An island in the sea, a huge explosion, rocks falling everywhere, and more mirthless laughter. Returning to the present, Harry notices Cho, eyes still staring at the diadem, but she breaks away, nods, and follows Harry out of the room and back to Dumbledore's office, where the sword is waiting for them. Place it here, on the desk, says Harry, who's now holding the sword in his hand. Cho, Harry, it's the only known relic of Ravenclaw. It spoke to me when I grabbed it. We can use it! And without warning, she forced the diadem onto her head, and she screamed. Harry barely had any time to register what was happening. Cho's eyes had begun to glow white. She was floating in the air. She was laughing. He was laughing. He could see the scene from several points of view. He could see himself through Cho's eyes, through Ron's eyes. He was Cho, he was Ron, Ron was him, and Voldemort was there too, laughing, taking in the scene around him, staring out at the room through Cho's eyes, seeing Hermione, Neville, Harry, and Ron staring up at him, at them. Okay, so pause. What's happening here is that, as you know, the diadem is supposed to offer extra wisdom or intelligence to whoever wears it, but of course it's corrupted as a Horcrux. Thus, its power now is that uniquely the bit of soul inside of it shares memory and knowledge with Voldemort Prime. Whatever he knows, it knows, and if someone puts the diadem on, he can control that person from wherever he is, almost as if he has a second body somewhere else, like an avatar or something. Unpause. Potter! Voldemort's cold voice rings out. See now how fate favors Lord Voldemort. I knew you had discovered my secret and sought to move my Horcrux, and yet my Horcrux has delivered me to you. But first, let's correct Lucius's mistake, shall we? Harry could hardly make out what was happening. He was watching everything unfold from 3 different points of view, and his scar was pounding. He watched Cho pull out her own wand, watch her point it at Ron, watched himself as Cho point the wand at Ron, and the most horrible, saw from Ron's point of view, the green flash. The Avada Kedavra! There was no time to react. Nothing to be done. The spell hit Ron full in the chest, and he collapsed, dead. Yeah, there you go. But nobody had Cho kills Ron on their bingo card, did ya? Did ya? Anyway, we continue. Rage erupted inside of Harry like nothing he'd ever experienced, and the anger forced him back inside of his own mind, with no other visions. But what could he do? The sword had fallen out of his hands. He grabbed his wand ready to fight, but he couldn't kill Cho, couldn't hurt her. And yet, too late, Harry Potter. You're dead at last. Cho's wand raised once more, and then clang! Hermione had grabbed the sword off the floor and rushed at Cho's floating figure, swinging with accuracy Harry wouldn't have believed. The blade had collided with the diadem, creating a huge crack down the front. It had miraculously worked. The small tiara fell off Cho's head, who collapsed on the floor, unconscious, but with no visible injuries. She's still breathing, said Neville, who had rushed to her side, apparently the only one not in complete shock. With Cho's safety assured, Harry turned his head to his brother, Ron, whose lifeless form lay across the office from him. He rushed to his side, unable to believe it. Sure, there had to be some mistake, some way back, and yet also knew Ron's death was true. He had felt it, seen it, done it. It couldn't be. There had to be an explanation. He looked up at the quiet face of Dumbledore in his portrait, who had a grave expression on his face. Somehow, Harry knew what he had to do, why he could see through Voldemort's eyes, what all of this had been for. They had come so far, but every piece of Voldemort had to be destroyed, and he understood now he, Harry, had to be destroyed. He gave a solemn nod to Dumbledore's portrait when the room shook violently. An explosion could be heard in the distance. Voldemort had arrived.
Racing to the nearest window, Harry could see a small envoy of masked wizards crossing the grounds towards the castle, huge balls of light being hurled from their wands towards the ramparts. Voldemort was at their center, and Harry could see the faint dark outline of the giant snake Nagini at his side. Harry pushed away from the window and without a word shot from the headmaster's suite, barreling through corridors, jumping clear over the trick step as he made his way towards the castle entrance and the invading army of Death Eaters. He understood now the small island he had witnessed before must have been Voldemort breaking open Azkaban to swell his ranks before attempting an attack on the castle. The great oak doors almost seemed to expect him and shot open as Harry leapt onto the grounds. He stood calmly before the illuminated castle behind him. The Death Eaters froze and made way for Voldemort, parting their ranks so he could step forward to face Harry. Okay, so quick pause again. This is an important moment because, remember, Voldemort hasn't taken Harry's blood this time. He is, however, master of the Elder Wand. For real. Can he attack him? And without Lily's blood in his veins, can Harry survive? Voldemort stared at the boy standing before him, before lifting his wand and splitting the silence as he screamed, Avada Kedavra! Just then, Harry felt himself lying on a warm surface, unsure of where he was. He slowly opened his eyes to see a bright mist. He sat up and realized the mist wasn't obscuring his surroundings, but rather making them. That's funny, said a voice. I was sure this was a place for the Weasleys who had, kicked it. Harry spun to see red hair, almost blinding amongst the mist. Ron, he shouted. How? But you were, am I? Where are we? I don't know. I got here just before you, or at least I think I did. I'm not sure if there's time here, Ron responded. They heard a pathetic whimpering noise nearby and recoiled at the sight of a small, naked something. What is it? Ron asked, when there came a third soft voice. Nothing two boys as brave and whole and good need to concern themselves with. Trust me, you cannot help. Dumbledore! Harry and Ron shouted together as they saw their headmaster appear from the mist. They ran towards him before coming to a sudden halt. But sir, you're dead. Does that mean, are we? That is the question, isn't it? On the whole, dear boys, I think not. Dumbledore went on to explain that when Harry was just a boy, that his mother had sacrificed herself to save him. It caused Voldemort's curse to backfire, but a piece of Voldemort's soul had latched itself onto the only living thing in the room. He explained that this protection quite uniquely protected Harry from so much as being touched by Voldemort. But sir, he was able to, he used the killing curse, and no one was there to protect me this time. I'm afraid I might be to blame. I used my last moment to protect you both. A choice I would make again, Dumbledore replied. But that isn't your fault, sir, Ron interjected, looking sympathetically at his headmaster. No, that part is of no fault but Voldemort's, whose cruelty knows no bounds. I speak instead to the wand I had in my possession, a wand that possessed unique powers, the Elder Wand. Harry and Ron listened with rapt attention. When he defeated me in the cave, he became the master of the Elder Wand. New powers came under his command, and, as it seems, the power to successfully attack you, Harry. But, sir, said Harry nervously, you said I'm not dead. How can that be? Ah, said Dumbledore with a flicker of a smile. For that, we must give thanks to Mr. Ronald Weasley. Ron blushed before asking, me? But what did I do? Voldemort took your blood that night in the graveyard to his own great displeasure. Poor Lucius Malfoy is proof of that. My blood? But what does that have to do with Harry? You are brothers, responded Dumbledore simply. Magic has a funny way of understanding these things, especially when it comes to love. Lily died to protect you, Harry, to protect her family. When your parents took Harry in, the Weasleys became his family and loved him as one of their own, and in doing so, have all been protected by Lily's sacrifice. Harry and Ron stood in stunned silence. Ron finally broke it, asking, Harry could see into Voldemort's mind because he had a piece of Voldemort's soul within him. Is that why I could too? Because he took my blood? That is an excellent question. However, not the reason why you could see into Voldemort's mind. I'm afraid, once again, I am at fault. You see, I was sorely tempted to return my own family. The ring featured a special stone I had sought long ago, the Resurrection Stone. I thought maybe, if I put it on, I could bring them back to me. A foolish and selfish thought, Dumbledore finished bitterly. I was lucky to have you both there. Ron, you discovered Hufflepuff's cup, which was a Horcrux. Its own magic, combined with Fawkes's tears, was able to heal not only myself, but also the cup, purging it of Voldemort's soul. The problem, however, is that Phoenix Tears are not destructive in nature. In fact, only the opposite is true. While they were able to purify the cup, it forced the piece of Voldemort's soul out, and unfortunately, directly into the person holding it. I became a Horcrux? Dumbledore stared down his crooked nose at Ron, glowing with pride as his blue eyes began to water. You were. When Voldemort attacked you with Miss Chang's body, he inadvertently found a way around Lily's protection without meaning to, which only protected you from Voldemort. But since he used another's body, he trailed off, understanding flashing across the boys' faces. Another long silence filled the space. We have to go back, don't we? Harry finally asked. Well, it would appear you have found your own loophole. When Voldemort took your blood, Mr. Weasley, he also took Lily's sacrifice. Thus, if you wish, and you do not have to, I suspect we could defeat Voldemort once and for all. And with that, Dumbledore stepped away into the mist. Just then, Harry felt the cool breeze brush over him. A stunned silence seemed to echo across the grounds. Something had happened. It sounded as though Voldemort was returning to his feet. Teachers and students alike seemed to be pouring from the castle to discover the scene before them. Gasping at what they saw, Harry lying still on the ground. Harry's fingers twitched, fastening discreetly around his wand, which lay next to him. Barely daring to move, Harry opened his eyelids a fraction and saw Voldemort standing in front of a crowd of Death Eaters, the great snake slithering around his feet. Your great savior is defeated, and see now what happens to those who oppose Lord Voldemort. Nagini, feast. Harry could feel the snake approaching him. The time to act was soon approaching. 20 feet away, 15, 10. And just as Harry made to sit up, he heard a battle cry from the students behind him, and Ron rushed forward, carrying the sword of Gryffindor high above him. So shocked was Voldemort at Ron's appearance that he hesitated for just long enough. This was it. Ron was going to kill the snake, and then... Expelliarmus! The spell hit Ron mid-stride, and the sword skittered out of his hand. Draco Malfoy was emerging from behind Voldemort, wand raised, and Voldemort let out a laugh. Very good, Draco. Very well indeed. Draco picked up the sword and looked back at Ron, Nagini drawing herself up, ready to consume Harry. You killed my father, Weasley. Or at least that's what I thought. But you're really not clever enough for that, are you? No, you're only clever enough to attack a snake when the real man you want is over there. What could you be thinking? From behind his eyelids, he thought he could just barely make out Draco give the smallest wink, and then, without warning, he raised the sword, and with a great slashing motion, cut the head off the snake. That's for my father, he said, staring at Voldemort, whose eyes filled with fury. He raised the Elder Wand again and aimed at Draco. But now Harry was on his feet, and he rushed forward. Voldemort realized who his new attacker was at just the last moment, aiming now for Harry. Harry did not know if it was on instinct or if his wand was somehow magnetically drawn towards Voldemort, but without saying a single spell, watched as magnificent golden flames erupted from his wand tip. They crashed into the oncoming green light and seemed to light fire to death itself, a fire that spread all the way to Voldemort's wand tip, igniting first it, and then its master. Voldemort's screams ripped the air as the flames engulfed him. It seemed to last ages, or maybe only moments, but then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the flames were all gone, and all that remained was a small pile of ash. And that is what would have happened if Ron was sorted into Hufflepuff. Whew, we did it!
We did it!
Now, wait a second. Does this mean that both Cedric and Sirius made it to the end of the book? Let's take it back again, people. From the top! Y'all, as always, I cannot thank you enough for all of your support through this very long 10-part series, but we really hope that you've enjoyed it along the way. If you'd like to find out what would have happened if Harry was in Slytherin, you can do so right over here, but otherwise, until next time, bye!